Hey there, tonight we're diving into the bustling world of river trade in ancient Egypt, where the truth is that navigating the Nile involved more than just serene boat rides. It was a high-stakes affair of dodging crocodiles and haggling prices under a blazing sun. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. You crack open your eyes to the vibrant sun climbing over the horizon, casting its golden glow on the mighty Nile. This is no ordinary river. It's the lifeblood of ancient Egypt, the original expressway of civilization. As you step onto the bustling banks, you're not just witnessing history. You're smack in the middle of the ancient world's economic hub, where the Nile isn't just a river, but a superhighway for trade. Forget asphalt and Teslas. This is where goods glide smoothly on water, thanks to the world's oldest Uber service, the trusty Egyptian boat. Now, let's talk logistics, my friend. The Nile stretches over 1,000 kilometers through Egypt, making it the perfect conveyor belt for trade. Picture enormous cargo boats, some as long as 40 meters, built with papyrus and wood. These floating behemoths are the workhorses of commerce, carrying everything from grain to gold. And yes, when it comes to engineering marvels, these boats are the real stars. Crafted with a precision that would make any modern engineer nod in approval, they're built to handle the river's gentle flow and the periodic tantrums of the cataracts. You see, the Egyptians weren't just playing around with boats. They had this ancient FedEx system down to a science. The northbound journey along the Nile was particularly fascinating, thanks to the prevailing winds. The sails were designed to catch these winds, turning the boats into the ancient equivalent of high-speed rail. Heading north, you'd be cruising, well, assuming the wind guards were in a good mood. Going south, that's when you'd rely on the river's current to do the heavy lifting. Let's not gloss over the nitty-gritty of this operation. These boats weren't just floating boxes. Picture a crew of skilled oarsmen, each working in perfect unison, their muscles rippling as they row in time. The rhythm of their strokes is like the heartbeat of the Nile itself. And then there's the cargo: grain, papyrus, linen, gold, and even exotic items like incense and spices. Each item has its own story, its own journey from the far corners of the known world to the heart of Egyptian markets. But let's get real for a second. While the romanticized vision of serene river travel is nice, the reality was a bit more, shall we say, gritty. Boats could capsize, cargo could spoil, and let's not forget the occasional run-in with crocodiles. Yes, those snappy little nuisances were very much a threat. And while we're bursting bubbles, let's address the labor behind this operation. The men handling these boats weren't just leisure sailors. They were often working in grueling conditions, dealing with everything from unpredictable weather to the constant threat of river pirates. Speaking of which, the Nile wasn't just a commercial artery. It was a geopolitical chessboard. Control over the river meant control over trade, and that meant political power. Pharaohs and local rulers had to ensure the security of these waterways to maintain their grip on the economy. This wasn't just about moving goods. This was about maintaining an empire. Let's pause for a moment to appreciate the craftsmanship involved. Boats were primarily made from acacia wood and reeds, with sails spun from flax. These materials were abundant and durable enough to withstand the elements. Building a boat was an art form, a collaboration between carpenters, weavers, and sailors, each bringing their expertise to the table. And when it came to navigating the Nile, well, that required its own brand of savvy. Knowing when to set sail and when to anchor for the night was crucial, not just for efficiency, but for survival. Now, let's add a sprinkle of human element here. Imagine the bustling ports along the Nile. Picture merchants haggling over prices, boatmen shouting orders, children playing by the water's edge, and the occasional priest offering blessings for a safe journey. It's a cacophony of life, a vibrant testament to a civilization thriving on the banks of a river that never stops moving. And then there's the economic powerhouse behind all this activity. The Nile allowed Egypt to export surplus grain, making it a crucial player in the Mediterranean economy. This wasn't just trade for the sake of trade. This was about establishing Egypt as a dominant force in the ancient world. The prosperity brought by the Nile allowed for the construction of monumental architecture, the flourishing of arts and sciences, and the expansion of Egypt's influence far beyond its borders. But let's not get too misty-eyed. While the Nile was indeed a blessing, it was also a harsh taskmaster. The annual flooding was both a boon and a bane. It enriched the soil, but could also wipe out entire settlements. The delicate balance between man and nature was a constant dance, one that required vigilance and respect for the river's unpredictable moods. As the sun starts to dip, casting long shadows over the water, you realize that the story of the Nile is more than just a tale of trade routes and boats. It's a story of survival, innovation, and the relentless pursuit of prosperity. It's about how a civilization rose to greatness by harnessing the power of a river that was both a giver and a taker. And as you stand there, watching the boats glide by, you can't help but marvel at the ingenuity of those ancient Egyptians who turned a river into the lifeline of an empire. So, as the boats glide by, we dive deeper into the economic engine room of ancient Egypt, where commerce wasn't just a side hustle, it was the main event. You see, the Nile wasn't just a river, it was the beating heart of an intricate trade network that kept Egypt's economy pumping like a well-oiled machine. And while we're all for a good yarn about the benevolent Nile trader, the truth is, this riverine world was a cutthroat battleground where survival of the fittest was the name of the game. Let's talk numbers, shall we? Transporting goods along the Nile wasn't exactly a budget-friendly affair. The cost of moving a ton of grain from Thebes to the Mediterranean coast could set a merchant back about 2 deben of copper, roughly 180 grams. And before you dismiss that as pocket change, remember this. Copper was the ancient equivalent of the dollar. This wasn't just loose change jingling in a merchant's pocket. It was a serious investment, one that required a keen eye for profit margins and a nose for opportunity. Now, who controlled this lucrative trade, you ask? Enter the power players, the scribes and merchants, the unsung heroes of the Egyptian economic saga. These guys were the original spreadsheet wizards, keeping track of every transaction with the precision of a Swiss watch. Forget your Excel macros. These scribes could tally grain shipments and calculate taxes faster than you can say pyramid scheme. And speaking of taxes, let's not forget the pharaohs, those ancient IRS agents with a penchant for gold. Every transaction was meticulously recorded, and a portion of the profits always found its way into the royal coffers. This wasn't just about filling the state treasury. It was about maintaining the pharaoh's divine status. After all, keeping the guards happy required a steady stream of offerings, and guess what? Those offerings didn't come cheap. But let's not get too misty-eyed over the efficiency of ancient bureaucracy. Markets were regulated with an iron fist, and anyone caught trying to game the system faced a fate that made modern penalties look like a slap on the wrist. We're talking fines, confiscation of goods, and in extreme cases, a one-way ticket to the afterlife. So, while the romance of the Nile trader might make for a good bedtime story, the reality was a high-stakes game where every move was scrutinized. Now, let's debunk a few myths, shall we? The notion of the benevolent Nile trader, gliding peacefully downriver, bartering goods with a smile and a handshake. Yeah, about that. In truth, the ancient Egyptian trade scene was more Wall Street than Woodstock. Merchants were ruthless negotiators, skilled in the art of the deal long before anyone uttered the phrase. Haggling was a sport, and only the shrewdest made it to the top of the economic food chain. Take the scribes, for instance. These guys were the gatekeepers of commerce, wielding their reed pens like swords. They maintained the ledgers, calculated taxes, and ensured that nothing slipped through the cracks. In a world where information was power, scribes were the kingmakers, and woe betide anyone who crossed them. And while we're at it, let's give a nod to the merchants, those shrewd operators who knew how to work the system. These were the folks who could turn a profit on a shipment of grain, then reinvest those profits into a new venture. They understood the art of diversification long before it became a buzzword. In a landscape where fortunes could be made or lost on the capricious whims of the Nile, adaptability was key. But let's not sugarcoat it. This was not an economy for the faint of heart. The competition was fierce, and the stakes were high. With every transaction, merchants navigated a complex web of alliances, rivalries, and regulations. It was a world where the line between success and failure was razor-thin, and only the most cunning survived. So, as we sail downstream, let's raise a glass to the scribes and merchants, the unsung architects of Egypt's economic might. These were the real power players, the ones who kept the wheels turning and the coffers full. And while the pharaohs might have worn the crowns, it was the scribes and merchants who held the keys to the kingdom. As we continue our journey, let's not forget the broader economic context. Egypt wasn't just a regional powerhouse. It was a major player on the international stage. The Nile allowed Egypt to export surplus grain, making it the breadbasket of the ancient world. This wasn't just about feeding the masses. It was about establishing Egypt as a dominant force in the Mediterranean economy. And let's not overlook the geopolitical implications of this trade network. Control over the Nile meant control over trade routes, and that meant political power. Pharaohs and local rulers understood this all too well, and they went to great lengths to secure their grip on the river. This wasn't just about moving goods, it was about maintaining an empire. But before we wrap up, let's take a moment to appreciate the human element of this story. Imagine the bustling ports along the Nile, where merchants haggled over prices and boatmen shouted orders. Picture the children playing by the water's edge, and the occasional priest offering blessings for a safe journey. It's a vibrant tableau, a testament to a civilization thriving on the banks of a river that never stopped moving. And that, my friend, is the real story of the Nile. It's a tale of survival, innovation, and the relentless pursuit of prosperity. It's about how a civilization rose to greatness by harnessing the power of a river that was both a giver and a taker. And as you stand there, watching the boats glide by, you can't help but marvel at the ingenuity of those ancient Egyptians who turned a river into the lifeline of an empire. As you stand there, watching the boats glide by, you can't help but marvel at the ingenuity of those ancient Egyptians who turned a river into the lifeline of an empire. But hold that thought, because as the sun reaches its zenith, it's time to dive headfirst into the midday chaos of a bustling Egyptian port, a place buzzing with more activity than a beehive on espresso. Welcome to the heart of the Nile's economic engine room. Picture this: docks teeming with workers, a cacophony of shouted orders, and the unmistakable scent of freshly hewn wood mingling with, let's be honest, the not-so-pleasant odor of sweat. Forget any illusions of genteel river cruising. The Nile port was where the real action happened, and it was as gritty as the bottom of a well-used sandal. First up, let's give a nod to the unsung heroes of the Nile trade, the shipbuilders. These guys were the rock stars of the ancient world, crafting vessels that not only defied the river's whims, but also outlasted the occasional crocodile nibble. The shipyards were a hive of activity, with artisans soaring, hammering, and lashing together timbers with a precision that would make a Swiss watchmaker weep with envy. A typical cargo boat could take weeks to build, with every plank of acacia wood meticulously fitted to ensure it would hold up against both the Nile's gentle caress and its occasional slap. Once a boat was ready to hit the water, it was the oar-pulling laborers who took the spotlight. Now, let's clear up one myth right away. Rowing on the Nile wasn't some leisurely activity reserved for toga-clad elites. Nope, it was back-breaking work, performed by a crew whose muscles were as chiseled as the statues of Ramses. These men were the human engines behind the trade network, and their lives were far from glamorous. Their days were a relentless cycle of rowing, unloading cargo, and feasting on whatever scraps they could barter or beg. What about those unseen hierarchies? You bet they existed. At the top, you had the ship captains and the merchants, pulling the strings and making the deals. They were the puppet masters, ensuring the goods flowed smoothly and their pockets stayed lined with copper and silver. Beneath them were the skilled workers, carpenters, rope makers, and sail weavers, each with their own crucial role. And then there were the laborers, the foot soldiers of Nile commerce, whose lives were as turbulent as the river itself. But let's not gloss over the dangers lurking in these waters. Piracy was a very real threat, with river bandits looking to snag a boatload of grain or a stash of precious metals. Forget the romanticized image of swashbuckling buccaneers. These were cutthroats who'd sooner gut you than give you a jaunty wave. To combat this, ships often sailed in convoys, safety in numbers being the name of the game. Pharaohs, ever the pragmatic overlords, stationed military outposts along key stretches of the river to keep these marauders at bay, a practice that was as much about protecting economic interests as it was about preserving their regal image. And then there were the floods. You see, the Nile's annual inundation was both a blessing and a curse. Sure, it brought fertile silt, making the land as productive as an over-caffeinated bee. But it was also unpredictable, a capricious force that could wipe out a trading season in one fell swoop. Merchants lived and died by the river's moods, a reality that was as thrilling as it was terrifying. When the waters rose too high or failed to rise at all, it wasn't just the crops that suffered, it was the entire economy. So, what drove these people to risk life and limb on the Nile? Simple: opportunity. For many, the river was a ladder out of poverty, a chance to make a name and a fortune. The Nile was a living organism, its currents carrying not just goods, but dreams, ambition, and the relentless pursuit of prosperity. It was a world where fortunes could be won or lost with the turning of the tide, where every shipment was a gamble and every deal a dance with destiny. As you soak in the scene, it becomes clear that the Nile port was more than just a hub of trade. It was a microcosm of Egyptian society, a place where the lines between class and status were as fluid as the river itself. Here, the noble and the commoner rubbed shoulders, united by a shared dependence on the Nile's bounty. It was a place of both possibility and peril, where the stakes were as high as the midday sun. And so, as the afternoon wears on, you find yourself marveling at this intricate ballet of commerce and survival. The Nile wasn't just a river. It was the lifeblood of a civilization, a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. And while the boats may continue their eternal journey, carrying with them the hopes and dreams of a people, the true story of the Nile is written not in the waters, but in the lives of those who dared to navigate its depths. But hold on, because our journey doesn't end here. As we delve deeper into this vibrant world, there are more stories to uncover, tales of innovation, adaptation, and the ever-present tug-of-war between man and nature. So, stay tuned as we continue to unravel the secrets of the Nile, one ripple at a time. And just when you thought we'd paddled through every nook and cranny of the Nile's bustling world, let's shift gears and head upstream to the big picture. Because this river wasn't just about boats and barter. It was the ancient world's geopolitical heart tub, where power dynamics simmered and alliances bubbled over like an unattended cauldron. So let's dig into the diplomatic currents of the Nile. Imagine it as a liquid border, a natural conveyor belt of influence that transported not just goods, but ideas, cultures, and yes, even the occasional diplomatic spat. You see, the Nile wasn't just Egypt's private lane. It was the connective tissue of North Africa, a waterway that linked kingdoms, empires, and the occasional overly ambitious warlord. Take the grand old kingdom of Nubia, nestled to the south. These guys weren't just neighbors. They were the frenemies of ancient Egypt. Sure, they shared trade routes, exchanged goods, and occasionally lent each other a cup of sugar, or more accurately, a shipment of gold. But scratch the surface, and you'll find a friendly rivalry that sometimes got a little less friendly. Picture this. Around 1500 BCE, Thutmose I, a pharaoh with a grand vision and a gold-plated agenda, decided to extend Egypt's southern borders deep into Nubian territory. This was more than a land grab. It was about locking down control of the Nile and its wealth. The Nile, after all, didn't just bring prosperity. It was the ancient equivalent of a fiber optic cable, transmitting power and influence at the speed of a well-oiled galley. But it wasn't all pharaohs flexing their muscles. Fast forward to the reign of Ramses Roman II, the rock star of Egyptian rulers. This guy knew a thing or two about diplomacy. In 1259 BCE, he struck the first recorded peace treaty with the Hittites after a particularly nasty scuffle at Kadesh. And where did much of this diplomatic maneuvering take place? Along the banks of the Nile, of course. The river was the stage for grand embassies and the occasional cloak and dagger intrigue. It was where treaties were negotiated, alliances forged, and occasionally betrayal plotted. And let's talk about those treaties. They weren't just about who got to put their flag where. They were intricately tied to trade rights and economic interests. Control the Nile, and you controlled the flow of goods, from the coveted cedar wood of Lebanon to the exotic spices of Punt. It was a game of chess, with the Nile as the board and every boat a pawn, rook, or, on a good day, a knight. But the Nile wasn't all about formal agreements and handshakes. It was also the backdrop for some epic tales of espionage and skullduggery. Imagine spies slipping through the reeds, gathering intelligence on troop movements or the latest trade deals. These were the unsung heroes, or villains, depending on your perspective, of the ancient world, the shadowy figures who kept the rumor mills grinding and the power plays in motion. Now, speaking of power, the Nile was the ultimate equalizer, and sometimes the ultimate disruptor. When the river decided to throw a tantrum with a particularly harsh flood or a stubborn drought, it wasn't just the farmers who felt the pinch. Entire political structures could be upended, alliances tested, and rivalries exacerbated. The pharaohs, those paragons of divine might, were quick to take credit for the river's bounty. But when the Nile went rogue, well, it was a different story. Suddenly, divine favor seemed a bit more fickle, and public support could dry up faster than a papyrus scroll in the desert sun. And while we're on the topic of disruption, let's not forget the role of the Nile as a refuge, a place where the displaced and the dispossessed could find a new beginning. When the Sea Peoples made their infamous rounds in the late Bronze Age, causing chaos and collapse wherever they went, Egypt remained a bastion of relative stability and prosperity, largely thanks to the river. Refugees and traders alike found sanctuary along its banks, contributing to the rich tapestry of cultures and ideas that defined Egypt. So, as the afternoon light casts long shadows over the river, remember this. The Nile was more than just a highway for goods. It was the stage upon which the drama of ancient geopolitics played out, a vital artery that pulsed with the lifeblood of not just one civilization, but many. It was a place where the stakes were as high as the pyramids and the penalties for failure as swift as the river's current. As the sun begins its descent, casting a golden hue over the waters, we leave behind the bustling trade routes and instead ponder the weight of history that the Nile bore. It was a lifeline, yes, but also a battleground where the forces of nature, ambition, and survival clashed in an eternal dance. And as we prepare to venture further into this ancient world, remember, the story of the Nile is far from over. It's a tale still brimming with intrigue, innovation, and the indomitable spirit of those who dared to harness its power. Stay tuned, because there's plenty more to explore, and the river, like history itself, never truly stops flowing. As the sun dips lower, turning the Nile into a shimmering ribbon of gold, it's time to take a step back and reflect on the legacy of this watery wonder. You might say it's a river that wears many hats: highway, lifeline, and an ancient megaphone for power and prosperity. But let's not get too misty-eyed with nostalgia just yet. While the romantic image of graceful boats and benevolent traders is as enticing as a mirage in the desert, the truth is far more gritty and far more interesting. Let's kick off with some cold, hard numbers. The Nile wasn't just a pretty face in the ancient world. It was a logistical marvel. In its heyday, it stretched over 650 kilometers from its origins in East Africa to its delta in the Mediterranean, serving as the longest river in the world. But here's the kicker. This wasn't just about length. It was about what that length represented, a conduit of commerce that could shift the equivalent of 500 tons of grain on a single trip. That's enough bread to keep the entire city of Thebes munching on sandwiches for a year. Now, onto the labor that powered this beast. We've touched on the sweat and toil of the oarsmen, but let's not forget the unsung heroes who engineered this aquatic dance. The ancient Egyptians were the original logistics wizards, orchestrating a symphony of trade that kept the economy humming. And while we're debunking myths, let's clarify something. The Nile was no free ride. Taxes were steep, often taking a 10% cut of the goods transported. This wasn't just a toll road. It was an economic superhighway with a hefty price tag. What about the political chessboard the Nile represented? Well, control over this river meant more than just bragging rights at the local tavern. It was a ticket to influence, and every pharaoh worth their weight in gold knew it. The likes of Ramses Roman II didn't just dabble in diplomacy for fun. They did it to secure their grip on this arterial lifeline. The Hittites, the Nubians, even the sneaky Sea Peoples, all knew that whoever controlled the Nile held the keys to the kingdom. It was geopolitical monopoly, with the river as the boardwalk everybody wanted to own. Speaking of ownership, let's tackle the myths head-on. The notion of a harmonious, peaceful river trade is about as realistic as finding a Starbucks on the Giza Plateau. The truth is, ancient Egyptian trade was cutthroat, a daily grind where the stakes were as high as the pyramids and just as treacherous. River pirates weren't just a bedtime story. They were a real threat, making every shipment a gamble. And those romanticized traders, they were more Gordon Gekko than Gandhi, driven by profit margins and market shares, not dreams of peaceful coexistence. Now, let's pivot to the cultural tapestry woven by the Nile. This river wasn't just a corridor for goods, it was a cultural highway, a silk road of the water that spread ideas, religions, and even the occasional scandal faster than you can say, papyrus scroll. The exchange of goods also meant an exchange of cultures, and the Nile was the original social media platform. It connected people, ideas, and innovations, laying down the foundations for everything from architecture to agriculture. And while we're on the subject of agriculture, let's talk about the infamous Nile floods. Yes, they were unpredictable, but they were also essential. Without them, the lush, fertile lands that made Egypt the breadbasket of the ancient world would have been as barren as a pharaoh's tomb after a looting spree. It was a delicate dance with Mother Nature, a high-stakes poker game where the river held all the aces. Fast forward a few thousand years, and the legacy of the Nile trade still lingers. Modern economies owe a debt to these ancient practices. Just think about our modern supply chains. Global networks that stretch from Beijing to Buenos Aires, all taking a page from the ancient Egyptian playbook. The Nile's duality as both a giver and a taker is a testament to human resilience and ingenuity, a reminder that prosperity often comes with a price. So why do the romantic myths of the Nile endure, even when reality paints a less rosy picture? Because, my friend, human nature is drawn to legends. We love a good story, a tale of heroism, adventure, and triumph over adversity. The myths endure because they speak to our need for wonder, for the belief that somewhere, just out of reach, lies a world where the river always flows gently and the traders are always smiling. But here's the real kicker. The truth, while less glamorous, is infinitely more compelling. It's a story of grit, determination, and the relentless pursuit of survival. It's about a civilization that rose to greatness not through magic, but through hard work, savvy negotiation, and an unyielding spirit. The Nile wasn't just a river. It was a testament to what humanity can achieve when we dare to harness the forces of nature. As the evening settles over the Nile, casting a serene glow on the water, you're left with a nuanced understanding of its legacy. The river is both a symbol of prosperity and a monument to the human spirit, our ability to adapt, innovate, and thrive against the odds. And as you drift off into the night, remember this. The Nile, like history itself, is a living, breathing entity, forever flowing, forever changing, and always inspiring. Welcome to the medieval world, where being a fisherman is pretty much the worst career choice, unless you're cool with a daily dose of back-breaking labor, constant wet feet, and the occasional bout of scurvy. But hey, who needs vitamin C when you've got fish guts, right? The Middle Ages were a time when bartering was the name of the game. Coins, those were shiny things for the upper crust, lords, ladies, and anyone who didn't smell perpetually of card. You, my friend, are dealing in the currency of fish. Every morning, it's you and your trusty boat against the vast, unforgiving sea, hoping today's catch is enough to swap for a loaf of bread and maybe, if you're lucky, some ale. Let's talk about your diet. In a world where bread is king, fish plays the crucial supporting role, especially on Fridays, thanks to religious fasting rules. The church decreed that meat was a no-go on Fridays, and fish was the holy loophole. So, as a fisherman, you're basically the medieval celebrity chef, bringing the ocean's bounty to the masses. But don't get too excited. It's not like you're serving up gourmet sushi. Think more along the lines of salted herring and maybe, if someone really splurges, a smoked eel. Just another day at the medieval seafood buffet. Economically, the medieval world is like a giant swap meet. You're not just trading fish for goods. You're navigating a complex web of favors and negotiations. Need a new net? Better hope the blacksmith likes mackerel as much as the next guy. The average peasant might never see a coin in their lifetime, relying instead on barter to get by. This means your catch of the day could be traded for anything from a jug of ale to a new pair of boots. It's like living in a world where your credit card is a freshly caught trout. Now, let's talk gear. Forget the fancy fishing rods and electronic depth finders of today. You've got a net, maybe a line or two, and your own two hands. Your boat, a small wooden contraption that you've patched up more times than you can count. Rowing out to sea at the crack of dawn, you're basically your own engine, powering through the waves with sheer muscle and determination. You're not just fishing, you're wrestling with the elements, praying that the ocean doesn't decide to swallow you whole. Fishing techniques haven't changed much over the centuries, and that's not necessarily a good thing. It's all about casting your net and hoping for the best. On a good day, you'll haul in enough to feed your family and maybe even trade for some cloth. On a bad day, you'll be lucky if you don't end up as fish food yourself. It's a tough gig, but it's your life, and there's a certain grim satisfaction in knowing that without your hard work, the local populace would be stuck eating nothing but bread and gruel. And then there's the weather. Let's just say the forecast is always partly miserable with a chance of hypothermia. You're exposed to the elements, rain or shine, with nothing but a woolen cloak to keep you warm. The sea doesn't care if you're tired or cold. It's a relentless beast that demands respect and offers little in return. You've learned to read the skies and sense when a storm is brewing, but sometimes even the best instincts can't save you from the fury of nature. So why do you do it? Why put up with the constant toil and danger? Because in this world, putting food on the table is a daily battle, and you're one of the few who can do it. You're a vital part of the community, and on those rare occasions when the sea is calm and the catch is plentiful, there's a sense of accomplishment that makes it all worthwhile. Plus, there's something to be said for a life lived on the edge, where each day is a new adventure and survival is never guaranteed. It's gritty, it's raw, and it's the life of a medieval fisherman. But hold onto your fishing hats, because now we're diving into the turbulent waters of medieval bureaucracy. Picture this. You've bested the sea, hauled in a net full of wriggling, glistening fish, and you're ready to trade your bounty for some essentials. But wait, before you can even think of hitting the dark side market, there's a pesky little thing called a fish tax to deal with. Yes, that's right, you've got to pay for the privilege of doing your job. Sounds absurd. Welcome to the feudal system, where absurdity is practically an official policy. Let's say you're casting your nets in the local river. You think, hey, it's right by my village. Surely this is fair game. Think again. That waterway might belong to your local lord, and he's going to want his cut. Historical records from England show that by the 13th century, fishermen were coughing up a portion of their catch, or a tidy sum of coins as a tax. It's like a medieval version of paying rent for a river. And if you think you could sneak past the taxman, well, think again. Feudal lords had a knack for keeping tabs on their property, and the penalty for dodging these taxes could be downright medieval. Ah, the joys of the feudal hierarchy. If you were fishing in Normandy, for instance, you might be dealing with the gay bell, a tax that could take up to 20% of your catch. That's right. 1 in 5 fish you caught didn't even make it to your dinner table. Instead, it went straight to the coffers of the local bigwig. Suddenly, your day out on the water looks less like a chance to provide for your family and more like an exercise in fundraising for the nobility. And then there's the social ladder to consider. Being a fisherman might sound ruggedly romantic. Let's get real. You're only a notch above a serf. Sure, you're not tied to the land like those poor souls toiling in the fields, but your freedom comes with strings attached, namely, the ropes and nets of your trade. On the docks, you're rubbing shoulders with a variety of characters, from fellow fishermen to merchants, and maybe even the odd pirate looking to offload some acquired goods. It's a vibrant mix of personalities, but the hierarchy is clear. The merchants have money and influence, while you're left hoping today's catch is enough to keep your family afloat. Legal battles. Oh, they're as common as gulls at the beach. Take the case of a fisherman in 1250 who dared to challenge his lord over fishing rights. The courts weren't exactly impartial. They were more like the lord's personal referees. This particular fisherman had the audacity to claim he had the right to fish freely, and guess what? He lost, and not just the case. The poor guy ended up losing his boat, too, which in medieval terms is like having your car repossessed today. It's a cautionary tale about knowing your place in the feudal pecking order. The docks are where the social script plays out in full view. You might be unloading your catch next to a group of burly sailors, their arms thick as tree trunks, or a sharp-eyed merchant calculating the day's profits. You're all part of the same ecosystem, but the hierarchy is unmistakable. As a fisherman, you're not at the bottom, but you're not far from it. It's a precarious balance, and one ill-fated storm or failed catch can send you sliding down a rung or two. And let's not forget the local laws, those gems of medieval wisdom that seemed designed to make life just a little bit harder. Consider the cargage tax, which was essentially a toll for using certain parts of the river. You pay a fee for the privilege of steering your boat through waters controlled by the local authority. It's like a toll booth on your daily commute, except the roads are made of water, and the toll collector might just be a knight with a penchant for heavy-handed enforcement. Why the high taxes and strict controls, you ask? It was about power, plain and simple. Fish were a crucial food source, especially during Lent, when meat was off the menu. Controlling fish meant controlling food, and controlling food meant wielding power over the populace. It's a classic case of medieval micromanagement, where every eel and card was counted, taxed, and documented. Despite these hurdles, there's a strange allure to it all. The sea calls to you, offering freedom and the promise of bounty, even as the feudal system seems determined to shackle you with taxes and obligations. It's a delicate dance between the open ocean and the closed doors of the Lord's manor, with you caught somewhere in between. As you navigate this world, you become acutely aware of the power dynamics at play. Every fish you catch is a testament to your resilience, a small victory in a world stacked against you. And so, you trudge on, because in the end, it's not just about the fish. It's about carving out a place for yourself in a world where the odds are rarely in your favor. Sure, you're playing by the rules of the feudal game, but every now and then, you manage to bend them just enough to remind yourself that the sea, at least, is still yours to conquer. As you set sail each morning, that salty breeze might seem like a promise of freedom, but don't let it fool you. The medieval sea is as fickle as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. One minute, you're gliding over calm waters. The next, you're clinging to your boat like it's the last slice of bread in a famine. Remember, this isn't some well-charted cruise with GPS and a cappuccino machine on deck. It's a gamble on the high seas, where the odds are rarely in your favor. Now, let's talk weather. Today, you've got meteorologists with their green screens and satellite images. But back then, your weather forecast was a squint at the sky and a prayer. Storms could roll in faster than a rumor in a small village, turning your fishing expedition into a survival course. Consider the notorious St. Mary Magdalene's flood of 1342, which wasn't just a sprinkle, but a biblical deluge that left parts of Europe scrambling for dry land. You wouldn't want to be caught out at sea during one of those, unless you fancied a swim with the fishes, in the permanent sense. And speaking of navigation, forget about those neat little maps with their tidy lines and compass roses. Medieval sailors relied on landmarks, the position of the sun, and sheer luck. The idea of longitude and latitude was as futuristic as hoverboards. Picture this. You're trying to find your way home, but the coastline looks like every other bit of land you've passed, and your only guide is a vague sense of direction. It's no wonder shipwrecks were as common as bad haircuts. Ah, the sea monsters. Those legends that kept many a sailor awake at night. The kraken, a giant squid-like creature rumored to drag entire ships to their doom, was the stuff of nightmares. But before you dismiss it as pure fantasy, consider this. Sailors of the time were encountering creatures they couldn't comprehend. A colossal squid, for instance, could easily be mistaken for a monster when you're peering down at it from a flimsy wooden boat. In truth, the real monsters were often much smaller and wielded cutlasses instead of tentacles. Enter piracy, the very real threat that turned many a peaceful fishing trip into a battle for survival. Pirates didn't just haunt the Caribbean. They lurked in the waters of the North Sea and the English Channel, preying on anything that floated. The infamous Eustace the Monk, a renegade who turned from monkhood to piracy in the early 13th century, is one such character. His fleet roved the Channel, raiding ships with the same zeal he once reserved for prayer. A fisherman encountering Eustace might find himself relieved of his catch, his boat, and possibly his life. Shipwrecks were practically an occupational hazard. Take the White Ship disaster of 1120, more of a luxury vessel than a humble fishing boat, but it serves to illustrate the point. The ship hit a submerged rock off the coast of Normandy, and out of approximately 300 people, only one survived. And if you're thinking that fishing boats might have fared better, think again. Their smaller size made them more vulnerable to both the elements and the relentless dance of rocks lurking just beneath the surface. But let's not forget the human element, the crew. These weren't seasoned adventurers. They were often locals pressed into service, their only nautical experience being the time they fell out of a rowboat as a child. This lack of expertise added a delightful unpredictability to every voyage. A routine fishing trip could become a comedy of errors or a tragedy, depending on the whims of the sea and the skills of the crew. Despite all this, there was a certain allure to the open water, a siren call that drew men back time and again. The sea offered a chance to escape the rigid confines of medieval society, if only temporarily. It was a place where a man's fate was in his own hands, or at least seemed to be, until nature or piracy decided otherwise. And yet, for every tale of misfortune, there were those who returned home with their nets full, their spirits high, and their pockets a little heavier. These were the lucky ones, the stories that fueled the myth of the sea as a place of opportunity and adventure. But make no mistake, for every successful voyage, there were countless others that ended in disaster, a sobering reminder that the sea, while offering freedom, demanded respect and exacted a heavy toll. So why did they do it? Why face the perils of the sea when the land, with all its taxes and feudal obligations, was at least a known quantity? Perhaps it was the promise of something more, a chance to defy the odds and claim a piece of the ocean's bounty. Or maybe it was simply the thrill of the chase, the eternal struggle against nature that defined their lives. As you navigate this turbulent world, it becomes clear that the life of a medieval fisherman was not for the faint of heart. It required grit, determination, and a healthy respect for the unpredictable forces of nature. It was a life lived on the edge, where every day was a gamble and every catch a hard-won victory. And while the dangers were many, so too were the rewards for those brave enough to face the sea and all its mysteries. But before you get swept away by the romance of the sea, let's talk about the real stars of this medieval maritime show, the tools of the trade. Picture yourself in a rickety wooden boat, barely seaworthy, and patched up like your grandma's quilt. These boats, often clinker-built, were marvels of medieval engineering, or a lack thereof, depending on how you look at it. Constructed with overlapping planks, they were designed to handle the rough seas of the North Atlantic, but in reality, they leaked like a sieve and required constant maintenance. You'd be bailing water out as often as you were hauling fish in. Now, about those nets. Made from hemp or flax, these nets were as durable as a wet tissue in a hurricane. They'd snag on rocks, tear on debris, and rot faster than a fish in the sun. A decent net might run you the equivalent of a few days' catch, and you'd better hope the local net maker was having a good day when he crafted yours. The key was in the knots, an art form in itself. A poorly tied knot could mean the difference between a boatload of card and a net full of disappointment. And let's not forget the hooks. These weren't your sleek carbon steel creations. They were crude, often fashioned from bone or iron. The irony: you needed to catch fish to afford better hooks, but you needed better hooks to catch more fish. It's the medieval version of being stuck in a perpetual trial version of a software you can't quite afford to upgrade. Then there's the smell. In an era long before deodorant and daily showers, the scent of fish wasn't just something you tolerated. It was practically your signature scent. Imagine eau de card wafting through the village, a pungent reminder of your trade. In fact, the smell was so ingrained in your life that it became a point of pride. After all, no one ever questioned what you did for a living. To the medieval nose, the fishy aroma was less of a stench and more of a cologne, a badge of gritty, hard-earned respect. And while we're on the topic of olfactory assaults, let's dive into the innovation, or lack thereof, in maritime technology. The truth is, the medieval period wasn't exactly a time of rapid technological advancement in fishing. The gear you used was pretty much the same as what your great-grandfather used. Sure, there were regional variations in boat design, like the Norwegian fairing or the English carbel, but the core technology remained as stagnant as a pond in August. Why, you ask? Well, innovation requires investment, and in a world where daily survival was the primary concern, who had the time or resources to tinker with new ideas? It's hard to invent the steam engine when you're more concerned about whether your nets will hold together long enough to catch dinner. However, let's not paint the entire era with a broad brush of technological gloom. There were moments of creative brilliance, like the use of weirs in river fishing, a series of wooden barriers and traps that funneled fish into a confined space. This technique was as ingenious as it was labor-intensive, and it could yield a substantial haul when executed correctly. But it was also a game of patience, waiting for the fish to swim right into your cunning trap. And speaking of patience, let's talk about the occasional lucky find. Every so often, the sea would offer up a bounty that could change a fisherman's fortunes overnight. There are tales of fishermen hauling in sturgeon, a prized catch that could fetch a small fortune at market. These prehistoric-looking creatures were the caviar producers of the medieval world, and landing one was like winning the fishy lottery. But of course, such windfalls were rare, and most days were spent wrestling with the ocean for a modest haul. The irony: despite the lack of significant technological progress, these medieval fishermen were masters of their craft, honing skills passed down through generations. They read the sea like a well-worn map, understanding its moods and rhythms in a way that modern technology can never fully replicate. In many ways, their expertise was their most valuable tool, a testament to human resilience and adaptability in the face of adversity. So, the next time you sit down to a plate of fish and chips, spare a thought for those medieval mariners who laid the groundwork for today's seafood industry. They braved the elements with little more than wooden boats, frayed nets, and a healthy dose of determination. And while their tools were rudimentary and their technology stagnant, their spirit and tenacity were anything but. They were the unsung heroes of the medieval economy, providing sustenance and livelihood in a world where every catch was a small miracle. But enough about the medieval fishermen's trials and tribulations. Let's dive into their legacy and how it's shaped our world today. Fast forward to the modern age, and you'll see how fishing has gone from a humble, hand-to-mouth existence to an industrial powerhouse. If a medieval fisherman were to time travel to a present-day commercial fishing operation, he'd probably think he'd stumbled into an alien world. Massive trawlers, sonar fish finders, and nets that could swallow his entire village. It's a far cry from his leaky wooden boat and hand-woven nets. In the medieval period, fishing was a subsistence gig. Catch enough to feed your family, and maybe trade a few fish for necessities. Today, it's a global industry. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization, the world caught roughly 179 million tons of fish in 2018. That's a number so big it makes your medieval catch look like a drop in the ocean. The quaint charm of subsistence fishing has given way to a high-stakes game where megacorporations battle for ocean's bounty. And while the romance of the sea is still alive in our imaginations, it's often overshadowed by the grim realities of overfishing, environmental impact, and corporate greed. Let's not forget the cultural shift. Back in the day, fish was a staple food, often the only protein folks could afford. It was the medieval equivalent of ramen noodles, cheap, accessible, and filling. Fast forward to the present, and fish is a delicacy in many parts of the world. Sushi, anyone. We've gone from salted herring to salmon nigiri. And while the culinary experience has evolved, the underlying truth remains. Fish still provides vital nutrition, just as it did in medieval times. But what about the fishermen themselves? The resilience and resourcefulness of their medieval counterparts still resonate today. They're the unsung heroes who brave unpredictable waters, much like their ancestors did, albeit with better gear and hopefully fewer pirates. The grit of these modern-day mariners echoes the same determination that kept medieval fishermen afloat, literally and figuratively. It's a reminder that while technology changes, the human spirit remains remarkably consistent. Now, let's debunk a few myths while we're at it. The idea of the rugged, romantic fisherman is as old as time, but it's a narrative that glosses over the harshness of the job. Sure, there's a certain allure to the image of a lone sailor battling the elements, but the reality, it's a career rife with physical danger, economic uncertainty, and long, grueling hours. In medieval times, it was a necessity, not a choice. Today, while some may choose the life for its freedom and adventure, others follow it as a family tradition, carrying on the legacy of their ancestors. And speaking of family, the communal aspect of medieval fishing hasn't entirely disappeared. In many fishing communities worldwide, the trade is still a family affair, with skills and knowledge passed down through generations. It's a testament to the enduring legacy of these medieval mariners, who navigated their watery world with nothing but intuition and experience to guide them. So, what can we learn from these gritty pioneers of the past? For starters, adaptability is key. Medieval fishermen were nothing if not adaptable, constantly tweaking their methods to outsmart the sea and its fickle moods. They understood the importance of community, knowing that survival often depended on mutual support and cooperation. And they were tenacious, enduring the whims of nature and feudal lords alike, their livelihoods hanging by a gossamer thread. In reflecting on their legacy, we see that the medieval fishermen laid the groundwork for an industry that feeds billions today. They were pioneers, navigating uncharted waters, both literally and metaphorically, driven by necessity and survival instincts. Their story is one of resilience, a testament to human endurance in the face of adversity. But let's wrap up with a nod to the romance of it all, because who doesn't love a good sea tale? Despite the back-breaking labor, the relentless elements, and the ever-present threat of taxes, pirates, and sea monsters, there was a certain freedom to be found out there on the open water. It was a life lived on the edge, every day an adventure, every catch a small miracle. So, next time you enjoy a seafood feast, spare a thought for those medieval mariners who braved the sea with little more than a prayer in a patched-up boat. They might have been covered in fish guts and reeked of card, but they were the real deal, living legends of their time. And while their world was fraught with peril, it was also rich with stories of courage, community, and the eternal human quest for sustenance and survival. Here's to them, the original sea dogs who, despite the odds, dared to dance with the deep blue. In a world still adjusting its crown post-World War Roman II, a 25-year-old Elizabeth stepped into a role she never thought would be hers so soon. Her father, King George VI, had departed the earthly realm in 1952, leaving behind a nation still clutching its ration books like lifelines, and a young woman who would become the longest reigning monarch in British history. But before the grandeur and the longevity, there was a moment that was anything but glamorous. Elizabeth was in Kenya when she got the news. Not exactly the perfect setting for what should be a royal ascension, unless you count an unintended safari as the ideal backdrop for becoming queen. She was staying at Treetops, a hotel perched up in the branches like a very fancy birdhouse. It was here that she learned of her father's death. In that instant, she went from Princess Elizabeth to Queen Elizabeth Roman II without so much as a ceremonial wave or a crown in sight. Now, Britain's economy was limping through the post-war landscape like a marathon runner who'd lost his shoes halfway. Rationing was still in full swing. Yes, folks, even the Queen had to deal with the aftermath of the war's austerity measures. The British were still queuing for their weekly rations of everything from bacon to sugar, and housewives became experts in creating culinary miracles with powdered eggs, an ingredient that should never have seen the light of day, if you ask anyone who lived through it. Politically, the map was redrawing itself faster than a kid with a new set of crayons. The British Empire, once a vast entity where the sun supposedly never set, was transforming into the Commonwealth, an association of states with less empire and more common. It was a time of decolonization, with countries like India and Pakistan having already stepped into independence in 1947. The wind of change was breezier than ever, and Elizabeth had to navigate this evolving landscape with the aplomb of a seasoned diplomat, which, ironically, she was learning to become on the job. Speaking of on-the-job training, Elizabeth's first big test came with her maiden international tour. Now, if you thought royal tours were all glitz and glamour, think again. This was 1953, and the royal purse strings were tighter than a drum. The tour covered 13 countries, including Australia, New Zealand, and the United States, spanning over 40,000 miles. It sounds impressive until you realize that the budget was so constrained that even the Royal Yacht Britannia, the floating palace, was only a twinkle in the budget committee's eyes. Instead, they hopped around in commercial airlines, mingling with the common folk at 30,000 feet. The tour wasn't just a logistical headache. It was a whirlwind of cultural diplomacy. Every handshake and wave were a dance of politics and public relations. In Australia, over 75% of the population turned out to catch a glimpse of the Queen. That's more than 7 million people lining the streets, straining to catch a momentary flicker of royalty. The tour was less about the pomp and more about re-establishing connections in a world that was rapidly changing its allegiances. But let's not forget the hiccups. The Queen, used to a life of regiments and predictability, was thrust into a schedule that would make a rock star's tour look like a walk in the park. There were instances of missed connections, accommodations that didn't quite fit the royal standard, and a constant battle against the ticking clock. Imagine having to keep a smile plastered on your face while your internal clock is doing cartwheels across time zones. Despite these challenges, Elizabeth's ability to connect with people was undeniable. She had the uncanny knack of making even the most mundane of royal duties appear significant. During her visit to a sheep farm in New Zealand, she reportedly showed a keen interest in the intricacies of wool production, not the kind of stuff that typically makes for riveting headlines. But it was these interactions that endeared her to millions. The tour marked the beginning of Elizabeth's reign in more ways than one. It was a trial by fire, a crash course in the delicate art of diplomacy, and a test of endurance that would set the tone for the next 7 decades. In an era where the monarchy's relevance was being questioned, Elizabeth's ability to adapt and connect would become her greatest asset. She wasn't just the face on the currency. She was the embodiment of a nation's continuity in a world teetering on the edge of modernity. So, there she was, a queen in her mid-20s, balancing the weight of a crown and the expectations of a nation, with a tour itinerary that would make a seasoned travel agent weep. Elizabeth Roman II early reign wasn't just a chapter in a history book. It was the beginning of a remarkable journey that would see her navigate the tumultuous waters of the 20th century with poise and a touch of British humor. And if you think her reign started with a silver spoon, think again. It was more like a teaspoon, rationed and well-used, just like everything else in post-war Britain. As the 1960s dawned, Queen Elizabeth Roman II found herself at the helm of a monarchy that needed a good dusting off. The world was changing faster than a teenager's mood swings, and the British monarchy had to keep up or risk being left in the historical dustbin. Enter television, a technology that had the potential to bring the royal family into living rooms across the globe, whether the royals liked it or not. In 1953, Elizabeth's coronation had already made history as the first to be broadcast on TV, watched by an estimated 27 million people in the UK alone. But by the time the 60s rolled around, the royals needed more than just ceremonial appearances to stay relevant. They needed to be relatable, approachable, maybe even gasp human. It was time for a royal makeover that didn't involve jewels or scepters, but something much more radical: transparency. Enter the 1969 documentary Royal Family, a behind-the-curtain look at the Windsors. The idea was to showcase the monarchy as both traditional and modern, a balancing act more precarious than a tightrope walker with vertigo. For the royals, letting cameras into their private lives was akin to inviting the public to a never-ending tea party where the guests never leave. The documentary was supposed to humanize them, but it often played out like a sitcom with an awkward laugh track. Picture the Queen making small talk about sausages at a family barbecue, definitely not the stuff of Shakespearean drama. The film, watched by over 30 million viewers in the UK, turned out to be a double-edged sword. Sure, it made the royals more relatable, but it also peeled back the layers of mystique faster than you could say coronation chicken. Suddenly, the British public could see their sovereign as someone who had to deal with the mundane realities of family life, like squabbles over who gets the last scone. It turns out, when you lift the royal veil, you find the same domestic quirks that exist in any family, but with much finer china. This attempt at modernization wasn't just about relatability. It was also wrapped up in the financial realities of the time. The Crown had to contend with the post-war economic hangover like everyone else. The royal finances were, shall we say, less than regal. The Queen's yearly civil list payment, a sort of royal salary, if you will, was always a subject of public scrutiny. By the late 60s, inflation was rising, and so were the costs of maintaining palaces that make Buckingham look like a cozy cottage. The truth was, the Crown's coffers weren't bottomless, and running a monarchy was expensive. The public image of limitless opulence was more illusion than reality. While the documentary attempted to demystify the monarchy, behind the scenes, the Windsors were still grappling with the unglamorous aspects of royal life. Take state banquets, for instance. In the popular imagination, these are grand affairs with caviar and champagne flowing like a river. The reality was a tad less glittering. Sure, there was silverware polished to a mirror finish, but the food was often less than Michelin star quality. Let's just say that the state banquet menu occasionally included dishes that could have doubled as war rations. The monarchy had to modernize not just in how it was perceived, but also in how it operated. The introduction of more informal, relaxed public appearances was part of this shift. It was a move to show that the royals weren't just relics from the past. but part of the living, breathing fabric of British society. However, integrating these new approaches was as clunky as a royal carriage in a Formula One race. The family had to learn the hard way that relatability wasn't just about looking the part. It was about genuinely connecting with a public whose lives were worlds apart from the pomp and ceremony of palace life. By the 1970s, the monarchy was steadily becoming a fixture on the small screen, with public engagements and official duties regularly broadcast. This was the era of television diplomacy, where a well-timed smile or a heartfelt speech could sway public opinion more effectively than any formal decree. Yet, despite their efforts, the perception of the monarchy as an institution of grandeur persisted. The public loved the spectacle, but remained blissfully unaware of the budgetary gymnastics that occurred behind palace walls to keep up appearances. In this period, the world saw the monarch not just as a figurehead, but as a relatable, albeit distant, symbol of continuity in a rapidly shifting landscape. The 70s were marked by economic turmoil, with oil crises and inflation affecting everyday life. For many, the Queen became a constant in a sea of uncertainty, a symbol of stability even as the economic waters threatened to capsize the nation. Modernizing the monarchy wasn't without its hitches and hiccups. The attempt to be both regal and relatable often resulted in comedic contradictions that could only happen in the unique world of royalty. It was a balancing act of maintaining tradition while embracing modernity, a paradoxical dance that Elizabeth mastered over decades. The Queen navigated these waters with a knowing smile, a reminder that beneath the crown lies a woman who, like everyone else, was doing her best to adapt to changing times. As the 60s and 70s unfolded, Elizabeth's reign was becoming a tapestry of tradition interwoven with threads of modernity. The world was watching, and the Queen had to perform the delicate act of steering the monarchy into the future without losing sight of its storied past. It was a challenge that required not just regal bearing, but the kind of diplomatic dexterity that only a life spent in the public eye could hone. And if anyone could walk this tightrope, was Elizabeth, poised, precise, and perpetually aware of the weight of history resting on her shoulders. As the curtain rose on the 1980, Queen Elizabeth Roman II found herself navigating a decade that would be anything but smooth sailing, a turbulent mix of global conflict, domestic strife, and the occasional llama dodging. Yes, you heard right. Her Majesty's adventures in South America included an unexpected encounter with these furry, four-legged creatures, proving that even queens aren't exempt from nature's little surprises. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, we need to wade through the geopolitical quagmire of the era. Enter Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady herself, who strutted onto the scene in 1979 and forged a complex, sometimes frosty relationship with the Queen. It was like watching two titans of British resolve locked in a polite tug-of-war. Thatcher, with her steely determination and radical economic reforms, was shaking up the status quo, while Elizabeth, ever the steady hand, was tasked with maintaining national unity. Their interactions were the stuff of legend and tabloids, two powerful women in a man's world, each with a vision for Britain that sometimes clashed like gladiators in an arena. By 1982, the backdrop of their relationship was painted with the Falklands War, a conflict that was geographically distant but emotionally close to home. The Argentine invasion of the Falklands, a British overseas territory, was met with Thatcher's firm military response. It was a 74-day conflict that saw Britain mobilize thousands of troops and naval assets to reclaim the islands. For Elizabeth, the war was a delicate balancing act. While constitutionally apolitical, she was the nation's symbolic leader, a figure expected to channel the collective resolve and spirit of her people. She managed this with her usual aplomb, offering support to the troops and maintaining a calm presence amidst the chaos. Now, let's debunk a myth or two, shall we? The Queen, despite popular belief, wasn't just a ceremonial figurehead during the war. While she didn't direct military strategy, her influence was felt in quieter ways. Behind the scenes, she was the steady voice of reason, a reassuring presence for those in power, including Thatcher. Imagine a sort of regal diffuser, if you will, smoothing the sharp edges of political discourse. And let's not forget the public perception. Her image was carefully managed to project strength and continuity, a move that kept national morale buoyant during the dark days of conflict. As if international crises weren't enough, the 1980 also demanded Elizabeth's diplomatic finesse on state visits. And here comes that llama story. During a trip to South America, the Queen faced a herding challenge that could have rivaled any royal duty, dodging llamas while maintaining her composure. It sounds like a Monty Python sketch, but it happened. Her visit to Peru in 1981 included a state banquet where, despite the pomp, the real stars were the llamas that roamed the grounds. It was a quintessentially Elizabeth moment, where humor met dignity and left an indelible mark on everyone present. These state visits were more than just ceremonial duties. They were Elizabeth's strategic PR campaigns on an international stage. Every handshake, every speech was meticulously choreographed to bolster Britain's image abroad. Yet, the reality behind the scenes was far less glamorous. Logistics of these trips, arranging security, managing schedules, and navigating cultural nuances, were nightmarish. The Queen's ability to adapt and engage with diverse cultures was a testament to her diplomatic prowess, even if it sometimes meant sidestepping a llama or two. Yet, one must question, how much actual influence did Elizabeth wield in matters of state? The romanticized view is that she was a queen whose word was law, but the truth is more nuanced. Her role was largely advisory, providing guidance in private meetings, but never crossing the constitutional line into politics. However, her influence was palpable in subtler ways, by embodying British values and offering a stabilizing presence during uncertain times. Her speeches, while devoid of political commentary, often carried the weight of public sentiment, a nod to her adeptness at reading the national mood. Public expectations were as varied as the Queen's many hats. On one hand, she was expected to be the indefatigable symbol of tradition. On the other, a modern monarch in touch with the people's lives. It was a tightrope walk of epic proportions, requiring her to be both timeless and timely. The 80s saw her navigating these expectations with a mix of humor and resolve, a sort of dignified dance where missteps were not an option. As we wrap up this glimpse into Elizabeth's 1980, it's worth noting that the decade wasn't just a series of tests and trials. It was also a period of personal growth and reflection for the Queen. Her ability to remain relevant in an ever-changing world was nothing short of remarkable. She was like a skilled sailor, expertly steering the monarchy through the stormy seas of modernity, ever aware of the winds of change, but never allowing them to blow her off course. So, there you have it. A decade of llamas, wars, and the Iron Lady, all woven into the fabric of Elizabeth's reign. And while the story doesn't end here, it's clear that the 1980 were a defining chapter in her extraordinary life. In the next part, we'll delve deeper into the challenges and triumphs that continue to shape her legacy, a saga that remains as captivating today as it was then. As the 80s faded into the rearview mirror, 1990 rolled in like a particularly moody teenager, bringing with it a series of challenges that would make even the most seasoned monarch reach for a stiff cup of Earl Grey. The decade kicked off with a cultural and political landscape as unpredictable as a British summer. Sunny one minute, a downpour the next. And the royal family, well, they were about to weather a storm that would test their mettle like never before. Let's dive into 1992, a year so infamous in the Windsor playbook that the Queen herself labeled it her annus horribilis. Latin for horrible year, this phrase wasn't just hyperbole, it was a royal understatement. Picture this. 3 of her 4 children's marriages crumbled like a poorly baked scone. Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson called it quits. Princess Anne finalized her divorce, and the fairy tale marriage of Prince Charles and Princess Diana hit the rocks with all the subtlety of a tabloid headline. Speaking of tabloids, the 90s were the golden age of royal gossip. The press had a field day, transforming every whisper of royal discord into front-page scandal. Public perception of the monarchy took a nosedive, and the Windsors found themselves embroiled in a PR nightmare. The idea of the royal family as an unblemished institution was unraveling faster than you could say, scandal sheet. Adding literal fire to the figurative flames, Windsor Castle, one of the Queen's official residences, went up in smoke in November of that same year. A faulty spotlight sparked a blaze that raged for 15 hours, causing extensive damage to the historic site. The cleanup and restoration, a cool £36, 5 million, with the public footing a significant portion of the bill. Cue public outcry. People weren't exactly thrilled to be paying for royal renovations while grappling with an economy that was less stable than a one-legged stool. In an attempt to quell the backlash, the Queen took the unprecedented step of opening Buckingham Palace to the public, charging admission fees to help cover the restoration costs. It was a move that felt less like a grand gesture and more like a royal garage sale. But it worked, sort of. The gesture did little to stem the rising tide of Republican sentiment, but it highlighted the monarchy's efforts to adapt in a changing world. Financial transparency became a buzzword in the 90s. The royal finances, long a subject of speculation, were laid bare like never before. For the first time, the Queen agreed to pay income tax on her personal income, a decision that was both a nod to public sentiment and a pragmatic step toward modernizing the monarchy's image. It was a case of putting her money where her mouth was, quite literally. And if you thought that was enough drama for one decade, hold on to your hats. The divorce of Charles and Diana in 1996 was an event that riveted the world. It was the stuff of soap operas, love, betrayal, and very public heartbreak. The marriage, which began with a fairy tale wedding in 1981, watched by 750 million viewers worldwide, ended in a media circus that left no detail unexplored. Diana's infamous Panorama interview in 1995, where she candidly spoke of her marital woes and coined the phrase, "There were 3 of us in this marriage," was a watershed moment. It was candid, it was raw, and it was everything the monarchy typically wasn't. This wasn't just royal gossip. It was a seismic shift in the public's perception of the monarchy. The days of keeping a stiff upper lip and carrying on were giving way to a new era of emotional honesty and transparency. Diana's openness resonated with the public, who were increasingly disillusioned with the monarchy's traditional veneer. The media landscape was evolving, and the royals were struggling to keep pace. The rise of 24-hour news and the internet meant that every royal misstep was broadcast instantaneously to a global audience. The monarchy could no longer operate in the relative privacy it once enjoyed. Public scrutiny was relentless, and every gesture, every word was dissected with forensic precision. It was a new world, and the Queen had to navigate it with the grace of a ballet dancer tiptoeing across a minefield. But Elizabeth, ever the pragmatist, wasn't one to shy away from change. She adapted her public persona to align with the times, embracing a more modern approach to monarchy. This included more informal public engagements and a willingness to engage with her subjects in ways that would have been unthinkable in previous decades. The Queen's speeches began to reflect a more personal tone, acknowledging the challenges faced by ordinary people and offering solace and solidarity during times of national hardship. Underneath the crown was a woman acutely aware of the shifting sands of public sentiment. Elizabeth's ability to adapt was not just a survival mechanism. It was a strategic move to ensure the monarchy remained relevant in a rapidly changing world. She was no longer just a symbol of continuity, but a testament to the power of adaptability and resilience. Yet, even as the monarchy evolved, the romantic allure of the royals remained. The public might have been more critical, more demanding, but their fascination with the royal family endured. There was a certain magic to the monarchy that no amount of scandal could completely tarnish. It was an institution steeped in history and tradition, a living link to a past that continued to captivate. The 1990s, with all its trials and tribulations, was a period of transformation for both the monarchy and the public's perception of it. It was a decade that tested the resolve of the royal family and forced them to confront the realities of modern life. Elizabeth's ability to navigate these challenges with wit and wisdom ensured that the monarchy not only survived, but continued to thrive. As we edge closer to the turn of the millennium, the stage is set for further evolution in the next chapter of Elizabeth's reign. The challenges of the 90s were a precursor to a new era, one that would demand even greater adaptability and foresight. But if the past is any indication, Elizabeth was more than ready to face whatever lay ahead, with a steady hand and a twinkle in her eye. As the millennium approached, Queen Elizabeth Roman II faced the new century with the kind of adaptability that would make a chameleon look like a one-trick pony. The world was spinning faster than ever, with the internet revolution changing the way we communicate, work, and even form governments. And there she was, a monarch who'd seen it all, from the post-war austerity of powdered eggs to the digital age of emojis. If the 20th century had been a roller coaster, the 21st was a high-speed rail, and the Queen was poised to keep her crown from wobbling in the wind. In the early 2000s, the monarchy faced a conundrum: how to remain relevant in an age where privacy was as elusive as a unicorn. The answer: social media. Yes, the very platforms filled with cat videos and conspiracy theories would become the new stage for the House of Windsor. It began somewhat modestly in 2009, when Buckingham Palace launched its first official Twitter account. Suddenly, the monarchy was just 280 characters away from the masses. It was hardly a revolution, but it marked a significant step towards modernity. By 2014, the Queen sent her first tweet, and the internet collectively lost its mind. Who knew that a 140-character missive could send such ripples through the digital ether? But the modernization efforts didn't stop at tweets. The royal family embraced digital platforms like Instagram and YouTube, sharing everything from official engagements to candid family moments. It was a calculated move to humanize the royals and make them more accessible to a generation that grew up with a smartphone in one hand and a world of information at their fingertips. The Queen's Christmas broadcasts, once the territory of television alone, began streaming online, reaching millions worldwide. The monarchy was shedding its image of aloofness and stepping into the digital spotlight, a transformation as radical as any in its 1,000-year history. Behind the scenes, the royal household was undergoing a quiet revolution as well. The Queen, recognizing the need for a more streamlined and efficient operation, initiated a series of reforms within the royal household. Staff numbers were reduced, roles were redefined, and costs were scrutinized with a magnifying glass. The sovereign grant, which replaced the civil list in 2012, was another step towards financial transparency. Though still funded by taxpayer money, the grant aimed to cover expenses more efficiently while making the monarchy's financial dealings more transparent. It was a pragmatic approach to a modern problem, an acknowledgement that public scrutiny wasn't going anywhere. While the Queen was deftly navigating the complexities of a digital age, her role as a stable figurehead in a rapidly changing world grew ever more pronounced. The early 21st century was marked by global upheavals, terrorism, economic crises, and political shifts that made the post-war years look like a tea party. Through it all, Elizabeth remained a constant presence, a figure who transcended political divides and offered a sense of continuity in a world that seemed perpetually on the brink of chaos. Take, for instance, the financial crash of 2008. As economies around the world teetered on the edge of collapse, the Queen visited the London School of Economics and famously asked, "Why did nobody notice it?" A simple question, yet one that resonated deeply with the public. It highlighted her ability to cut through the noise and ask the questions that mattered, an ability honed over decades of observing the world from her unique vantage point. Elizabeth's later years also saw a concerted effort to nurture the next generation of royals, ensuring the monarchy's survival in an era that didn't exactly scream "Long live the King." The younger royals, Prince Charles, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, and Prince Harry, were increasingly brought to the forefront. The monarchy was being future-proofed, with Elizabeth as the guiding hand behind the scenes. It was a delicate balance of tradition and innovation, a dance that Elizabeth had mastered over her reign. But let's not romanticize this era of Instagram filters and royal hashtags without acknowledging the challenges. The monarchy's embrace of social media was not without its missteps. The very platforms that connected the royals to the public also opened them up to unprecedented levels of scrutiny and criticism. Every tweet, every post was dissected and analyzed, and the lines between private and public life became blurrier than ever. The monarchy, once a bastion of mystery, was now part of the global conversation, whether it liked it or not. And then there was Brexit, the political earthquake that shook the United Kingdom to its core. As the country grappled with its identity and future, the Queen remained steadfastly apolitical, a symbol of unity in a nation divided. Her Christmas speeches during this period were masterclasses in diplomacy, offering messages of hope and togetherness without ever straying into the political fray. It was a testament to her ability to embody the nation's spirit without becoming entangled in its politics. Reflecting on Elizabeth's legacy, is like trying to sum up the history of the modern world in a single breath. Her reign saw the end of the British Empire, the rise of the Commonwealth, and the transformation of Britain from a global power to a nation redefining its place in the world. She witnessed technological revolutions, social upheavals, and seismic cultural shifts, all while wearing a crown that bore the weight of history. Her adaptability was nothing short of remarkable, a testament to her understanding that to endure was to evolve. Elizabeth's story is one of contrasts, the myth of an unchanging monarch against the reality of a woman who had to navigate 7 decades of global upheaval. She was both a relic of the past and a pioneer of the future, a symbol of continuity in a world that seemed to change with every tick of the clock. Her legacy is one of resilience and transformation, a reminder that even the most traditional of institutions can adapt and thrive in a modern world. And so, as the Queen's reign drew to a close, she left behind not just a legacy of longevity, but a blueprint for the monarchy in the 21st century. She demonstrated that the crown was more than just a symbol. It was a living institution capable of change. Her story is one of survival and adaptation, a narrative that continues to captivate and inspire. As history marches on, Elizabeth Roman II's reign will be remembered not just for its length, but for its depth, a reign that shaped the course of a nation and left an indelible mark on the world. In the sun-baked savannas of southern Africa, around 1075 AD, a scene unfolds that's as rich in intrigue as it is in natural resources. We're talking about a time when the southern African landscape was a smorgasbord of bustling ecosystems. Vast plains dotted with acacia trees, dramatic escarpments, and winding river valleys that whispered tales of past civilizations. Right at the heart of this vibrant tableau lies Mapungubwe, a name that might not yet roll off your tongue, but trust me, it should. This was no ordinary patch of land. It was a prime piece of real estate that would make even a 21st century property developer drool. Why was Mapungubwe so special, you ask? Well, let's break it down. The kingdom was strategically perched at the confluence of the Limpopo and Shash rivers. These rivers weren't mere trickles, but the lifeblood of the region, providing water, fertile soil, and a natural highway for trade. It's like having a penthouse suite with a panoramic view and a private elevator straight down to prosperity. The location was the ancient equivalent of owning beachfront property on the Côte d'Azur. The early settlers of Mapungubwe were no slackers when it came to innovation. They harnessed the geography to build an economic powerhouse. Picture this: fertile lands for agriculture, abundant wildlife for hunting, and most importantly, rich deposits of gold. Yes, gold. The shiny stuff that has sparked wars, toppled empires, and caused many a pirate to go on a treasure hunt. Here, gold was not just a fashion statement, it was the key to power and influence. Gold was to Mapungubwe what oil is to the modern Middle East, a ticket to the big league. With gold came trade, and with trade came wealth. The Mapungubweans were savvy entrepreneurs, trading not just with their neighbors, but reaching across the Indian Ocean to engage with the big players of the medieval world. We're talking about connections that stretched all the way to China and India. So, before you think of globalization as a product of the internet age, remember that Mapungubwe was doing it centuries ago, sans Wi-Fi. But all this prosperity wasn't just handed to them on a silver platter. The early settlers had to navigate the political and social intricacies of the time. These folks knew that to thrive, they had to be not just traders, but also shrewd diplomats. Alliances were formed, and rivalries were managed with a blend of tact, and when necessary, a show of force. It was a balancing act worthy of a tightrope walker, played out on the grand stage of southern Africa. Now, let's dispel a popular myth. The romanticized notion of a peaceful, harmonious African kingdom is tempting, but it doesn't quite hold water. The reality was far more complex. The early settlers of Mapungubwe were part of a dynamic and often volatile regional power structure. Competition for resources and influence was fierce, and conflicts were as inevitable as the sunrise. The Mapungubweans were trailblazers, yes, but they were also seasoned warriors when the occasion demanded. So, what's the takeaway here? The rise of the kingdom of Mapungubwe wasn't a fluke or a fairy tale. It was the result of strategic brilliance, economic acumen, and a keen understanding of the political landscape. The early settlers of this region laid the groundwork for a kingdom that would shape the course of southern African history, leaving a legacy that echoes through time. As we journey deeper into the saga of Mapungubwe, remember that behind the gold and glory were real people, visionaries who saw potential where others saw only wilderness. And so, the tale of Mapungubwe strides forward like an ancient elephant, lumbering yet unstoppable. As our story unfolds, we see a collection of humble huts transform into a kingdom that could rival the most intricate episodes of Game of Thrones, minus the dragons, but with no shortage of intrigue. The real magic wasn't conjured up by wizards, but by trade, plain old give and take, but with a flair that made it anything but mundane. Let's talk trade networks, those invisible threads that turned Mapungubwe from a backwater into a commercial juggernaut. Picture a bustling marketplace not unlike Wall Street, but with a bit more sunshine and considerably fewer suits. The Mapungubweans were savvy operators who understood the value of a good trade deal. Gold was just the start. Ivory was the other white gold of the savannah, and the Mapungubweans had it in spades, or rather in tusks. These weren't just any old elephant teeth. They were the ancient equivalent of a designer handbag, status symbols that everyone from Cairo to Calcutta wanted to get their hands on. Now, let's not forget the exotic goods. These were the medieval equivalents of the latest iPhone, must-have items that showcased your connections and wealth. Glass beads, believed to have come all the way from the Middle East, or even India, dazzled in the sun. Chinese porcelain made its way into the homes of Mapungubwe's elite, a reminder that while they may not have had tick-tock, they were part of a global network that spanned continents and cultures. And what did Mapungubwe get in return for all these treasures? Well, besides the obvious wealth, they also got influence. Picture Mapungubwe's rulers as the medieval version of influencers, their power and prestige growing with each trade caravan that rolled into town. The kingdom became a hub, a buzzing center where goods, ideas, and people intersected in a dance that was as complex as it was lucrative. Of course, with great wealth comes great responsibility, or at least the need to keep an eye on your neighbors. The romantic notion of a peaceful, utopian kingdom is tempting, but the reality was more like a medieval version of Survivor. Every alliance was a potential threat, and every trade partner a potential rival. The Mapungubweans had to be as sharp in politics as they were in business, navigating a landscape where the line between friend and foe was about as clear-cut as a foggy morning. And speaking of politics, let's delve into the social hierarchy that would make any high school cafeteria look like child's play. Mapungubwe wasn't just about making money. It was about making a statement. The kingdom's social structure was as layered as a lasagna, with the king perched at the top like a cherry on a sundae. This wasn't some egalitarian society. It was a place where who you knew and what you owned defined your spot in the pecking order. The king and his inner circle lived atop Mapungubwe Hill, a literal and figurative high ground that symbolized their supremacy. Down below, the common folk went about their lives, aware that the gap between them and the top was as wide as the African plains themselves. But let's not sugarcoat it. This wasn't an oppressive regime where the masses were downtrodden. The common folk were part of the machine that made Mapungubwe tick, their labor and loyalty vital to keeping the kingdom's gears turning. So why does all this matter? Well, Mapungubwe's rise from a collection of huts to a sophisticated kingdom wasn't just about gold, ivory, or exotic goods. It was about the interplay of economic savvy, political acumen, and social structure. This was a kingdom that understood how to harness its resources and navigate the complexities of a global network long before the term globalization was coined. As we continue to explore the legacy of Mapungubwe, remember that behind the romanticized myths and the harsh realities were people, real, flesh and blood individuals who saw potential where others saw only obstacles. The kingdom they built was a testament to their vision, their ambition, and their ability to thrive in a world that was as unpredictable as it was interconnected. Stay with us as we delve deeper into this remarkable story, uncovering the truths and debunking the myths of a kingdom that was as complex as the land it called home. As we continue our journey through the annals of Mapungubwe, it's time to lift the veil on the kingdom's inner workings. We're about to dive into the governance and social structures that made this ancient powerhouse tick. If you've ever imagined the past as a simpler time, think again. Mapungubwe's social hierarchy was as intricate as a Game of Thrones plotline, sans the dragons, but with plenty of metaphorical fire-breathing. At the summit of this social pyramid sat the king, a figure as shrouded in myth as any medieval monarch. But let's clear up one thing right off the bat. This wasn't a benevolent figurehead presiding over a utopia. Nope, the king of Mapungubwe was more like a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, balancing power dynamics and strategic alliances with the finesse of a Wall Street mogul. Positioned atop the iconic Mapungubwe Hill, he quite literally looked down on his subjects, both a strategic advantage and a daily reminder of his supremacy. Now, before you start picturing a king draped in gold, lounging around like a character from The Lion King, consider the realities of his job. He was the linchpin of a complex socio-political system, overseeing everything from trade negotiations with far-off lands to local disputes that could erupt faster than you can say elephant tusk. His power wasn't just about wielding a scepter. It was about maintaining a delicate balance of fear and respect among his elite and the common folk alike. Speaking of the elite, let's talk about those living in the king's shadow, literally and figuratively. These were the folks who had it made, the aristocracy of Mapungubwe, living a life of privilege and prestige. But this wasn't just about enjoying the best cuts of meat or wearing the latest in gold accessories. The elite had responsibilities that weighed as heavily as their ornate jewelry. They managed the kingdom's resources, ensured the smooth operation of trade routes, and kept a vigilant eye on the simmering tensions that could bubble over at any moment. But what about our average Ntombi, you ask? While the elite were busy playing a high-stakes game of chess, the common folk were the pawns, yet they were far from powerless. Our average Ntombi was the backbone of Mapungubwe, turning the wheels of agriculture, craftsmanship, and trade. Life wasn't exactly a picnic in the savannah, but it was a life of purpose and contribution. The labor of these everyday people was the engine that powered the kingdom's prosperity. They were farmers, herders, artisans, each playing a crucial role in the kingdom's intricate tapestry. It's easy to romanticize the past, imagining a time when life was simpler, but the reality was more nuanced. The social fabric of Mapungubwe was woven with threads of both cooperation and tension, unity and division. Power struggles were as inevitable as the setting sun. The elites had to constantly navigate the delicate balance of maintaining their status, while ensuring that the common folk were content enough not to revolt. It was a system that required as much diplomacy as it did governance. Alongside these social dynamics were the practical challenges of maintaining a kingdom. Let's face it, running a kingdom was expensive. There's no way around it. The costs of governance were as high as the temperatures in the African midday sun. Constructing the impressive stone structures that have tantalized archaeologists for years wasn't a weekend DIY project. It required skilled labor, resources, and yes, a whole lot of manpower. And let's not forget the logistical nightmare of feeding a growing population. The kingdom's leadership had to ensure a steady supply of food, which meant the agricultural sector had to be as strategically managed as any trading expedition. But here's the kicker. Not everyone was sipping palm wine and enjoying the sunset. For every artifact that dazzles in a museum today, there's a story of toil and effort. The exquisite gold jewelry and intricate pottery were the products of skilled craftsmen who worked tirelessly to create these masterpieces. These artifacts were not just symbols of wealth, but also of the labor and artistry that characterized Mapungubwe society. Behind every glittering object was the sweat of artisans who might not have enjoyed the same privileges as the elites, but whose contributions were invaluable. As we unravel the governance and social structures of Mapungubwe, we're reminded of the complexity that defined this kingdom. It was a society that understood the interplay of power, labor, and trade, a society that thrived on both cooperation and competition. It's a story that resonates even today, reminding us that behind every historical narrative are real people, grappling with the same challenges and ambitions that define the human experience. So, what's the takeaway from this peek into Mapungubwe's social tapestry? It's a reminder that history is never black and white, but rather a vibrant mosaic of ambition, innovation, and resilience. It's a testament to the visionaries who built a kingdom that would leave a lasting legacy, and to the everyday people whose efforts made that vision a reality. As we continue our journey through the saga of Mapungubwe, stay tuned for more revelations about this remarkable kingdom, where every stone and artifact tells a story of a time when the past was as complex and intriguing as any modern drama. Let's pivot from the stone and gold of Mapungubwe's earthly realm to the intangible forces that truly held this kingdom together, its cultural and religious bedrock. If you think ancestor worship sounds like a quaint custom, think again. For Mapungubweans, it was the spiritual superglue binding society in ways that make today's social networks look like child's play. We're diving into myths that are as gripping as a best-selling fantasy novel, yet grounded in the gritty reality of archaeological finds. First off, let's clear the air about ancestor worship. This wasn't about a bunch of folks sitting around a campfire swapping ghost stories. In Mapungubwe, ancestors were the ultimate power brokers. They were believed to wield considerable influence over the living, a bit like having an ancient board of directors watching your every move. And while most of us hope our ancestors are just resting peacefully, the Mapungubweans were convinced these spirits needed regular appeasement. Think of it as a spiritual insurance policy. To keep the ancestral spirits happy, rituals were a must. These ceremonies weren't just spiritual check-ins, they were full-blown events. Archaeologists have unearthed evidence of elaborate rituals, centered around hilltop sites that functioned a bit like sacred boardrooms. These gatherings were the real-life equivalent of a medieval TED talk, where the community gathered to renew their spiritual contracts and hopefully avoid any spectral wrath. Now, you might wonder how these rituals played out. While the specifics are lost to time, we know they involved offerings that would impress even the most demanding deities. Animal sacrifices were common, with cattle being the preferred divine delicacy. Why cattle, you ask? Well, they were the ancient equivalent of a Swiss bank account, a store of wealth and status rolled into one mooing package. Sacrificing a cow was like burning cash to show the ancestors you meant business. But ancestor worship wasn't just about keeping the ghosts of the past content. It was also a social glue that unified the kingdom. Picture this: a society where the past isn't just remembered but actively engaged. Everyone from the king to the common herder had a stake in these rituals. This wasn't some exclusive club for the elite. It was a communal affair that reinforced social ties and hierarchies. Participation was both a duty and a privilege, a reminder that in Mapungubwe, your connection to the past was as vital as your place in the present. Of course, myths and stories played a crucial role in these ceremonies, weaving narratives that connected the people to their land and ancestors. These tales were more than mere entertainment. They were the cultural code that guided behavior and belief. Imagine them as the ancient version of a blockbuster movie, compelling, instructive, and deeply influential. But let's get one thing straight. The spiritual landscape of Mapungubwe wasn't a monolith. It was as diverse as the terrain it occupied. While ancestor worship was the central pillar, it coexisted with a pantheon of deities and spirits that filled every nook and cranny of daily life. From rainmakers who were believed to control the weather, handy in a land where droughts could spell disaster, to fertility gods ensuring the survival of both crops and people, the spiritual world was a bustling marketplace of divine intervention. And as with any complex system, there were those who specialized in navigating it. Enter the diviners, the spiritual consultants who interpreted the will of the ancestors and gods. They were the ancient world's answer to a life coach, guiding individuals and the community through life's uncertainties. Their insights weren't plucked from thin air. They were grounded in a deep understanding of tradition, symbolism, and the human psyche. Now, let's debunk a popular myth: the idea that these religious practices were quaint and isolated, detached from the political and economic currents of the time. In reality, they were deeply intertwined. The king's role as a spiritual leader was as crucial as his political duties. His legitimacy was often tied to his ability to act as an intermediary between the earthly and divine realms. Imagine a ruler who was part priest, part politician, part CEO. This wasn't just about wielding a scepter. It was about commanding the spiritual authority that kept the kingdom's engine running smoothly. The archaeology of Mapungubwe offers tantalizing glimpses into this spiritual world. Artifacts like the famous golden rhino, a symbol of power and prestige, echo the sacred and the secular roles of the king. This isn't just bling for bling's sake. It's a testament to the intricate dance between material wealth and spiritual significance. The golden rhino, and objects like it, cemented the king's status not just in the eyes of his subjects, but also in the spiritual hierarchy. And while we're myth-busting, let's tackle the notion of a singular, harmonious spiritual tradition. The reality was more like a spiritual buffet, with a mix of beliefs and practices that evolved over time. This cultural fluidity was a strength, allowing Mapungubwe to adapt to changing circumstances and influences. The kingdom wasn't a static relic. It was a living, breathing entity that drew from its past while navigating the complexities of its present. As we unravel the cultural and religious layers of Mapungubwe, we're reminded that history is a tapestry of human experience. It's a story of how communities knit their beliefs into the fabric of everyday life, creating a legacy that resonates even now. The spiritual practices of Mapungubwe were more than rituals. They were the lifeblood of a society, striving for cohesion and continuity in a world as unpredictable as the African savanna. So, what's the takeaway from this deep dive into Mapungubwe's spiritual landscape? It's a reminder that behind every historical myth and legend lies a complex reality, one that's as multifaceted as the people who lived it. The kingdom's rise wasn't just about economic might or political cunning. It was about the spiritual foundations that sustained it through centuries of change. As we continue our exploration of Mapungubwe, keep in mind that every stone and artifact tells a story of a people who found strength in the unseen and unity in the shared threads of their narrative. Stay tuned for more revelations as we journey further into this remarkable kingdom, where history continues to echo through time. And so, as we find ourselves at the twilight of Mapungubwe's golden age, the skies of southern Africa begin to darken with clouds that aren't just metaphorical. Yes, folks, we're talking about climate change, an ancient twist of fate that rivals today's weather woes. Around the 13th century, the climate went on a bit of a tantrum, and by tantrum, I mean a prolonged dry spell that made the kingdom's fertile lands about as productive as a desert sand dune. You could say Mapungubwe got ghosted by Mother Nature, and she left no forwarding address. But before you start thinking climate was the sole villain in this historical drama, let's zoom out. Mapungubwe wasn't just a victim of meteorological misfortune. Resource depletion played its part too. See, when you're running a kingdom on the back of gold and ivory, you eventually hit a wall, or in this case, a vein. As the gold mines grew less bountiful and the ivory trade slowed, the economic engine started sputtering like an old jalopy. And then there's the wild card, human folly. With wealth comes power struggles, and Mapungubwe's internal politics were as tangled as a yarn ball in a kitten's playpen. Elites squabbled over control, alliances frayed, and before you could say dynastic dispute, cracks appeared in the kingdom's once unshakable foundation. Picture a royal court full of Game of Thrones wannabes, minus the dragons, but with plenty of metaphorical backstabbing. So, was it climate change, resource depletion, or just bad luck that did Mapungubwe in? In the grand tradition of historical complexity, let's check all of the above. The decline of this powerhouse was a perfect storm of natural and human forces, each playing its part in the kingdom's unraveling. And yet, in this tale of decline, there's a silver, or should I say gold, lining. You see, Mapungubwe's legacy didn't vanish with its fortunes. It paved the way for successor states like Great Zimbabwe, which picked up where Mapungubwe left off, turning the page but not closing the book. Great Zimbabwe, with its iconic stone ruins that still puzzle and awe archaeologists, owes a debt to Mapungubwe's trailblazing ways. The trade networks, social structures, and cultural practices that flourished at Mapungubwe found new life in this successor state. It's like Mapungubwe handed over the baton in a historical relay race, ensuring that its spirit of innovation and resilience lived on. In fact, the very stones of Great Zimbabwe whisper stories of their predecessor. The architectural marvels, the Great Enclosure, for instance, echo Mapungubwe's influence in their grandeur and complexity. It's as if Mapungubwe had laid the groundwork, both literally and figuratively, for Great Zimbabwe to rise and shine in the annals of African history. But let's not get misty-eyed just yet. The romantic allure of Mapungubwe's legacy is irresistible, but let's keep our feet on the ground. The kingdom's story is also a cautionary tale about the limits of growth and the fragility of human achievement. It's a reminder that even the mightiest kingdoms are at the mercy of forces beyond their control, be it the whims of nature or the folly of man. So, what's the takeaway from this saga of rise and fall? Well, Mapungubwe teaches us that history is a mosaic of triumph and tragedy, a reminder that progress is never a straight line, but a series of peaks and valleys. It's a testament to human ingenuity and ambition, tempered by the realities of a world that is as unpredictable as it is interconnected. And as we bid farewell to Mapungubwe, let's appreciate how its echoes still resonate today. This nearly forgotten kingdom, with its blend of romance and reality, offers a glimpse into the complexities of past civilizations and the enduring quest for prosperity and stability in an ever-changing world. So, as you drift off to sleep with visions of ancient traders and golden treasures, remember that behind every historical myth lies a tapestry of human experience, waiting to be unraveled by those curious enough to seek the truth. You blink awake to the sound of chickens clucking, a much more reliable alarm clock than anything you'll find in the 21st century. Welcome to your morning in 14th century Europe, where the air is thick with the scent of thatched roofs and yesterday's stew, a delightful concoction of smells that makes you reconsider breakfast altogether. But hey, who needs breakfast when you've got the Black Plague knocking on your village door, right? First things first, hygiene, or rather, the complete lack of it. Bathing is not exactly a daily affair, more like a whenever the river isn't frozen or filled with questionable substances kind of thing. Soap, a luxury for the nobles, or, let's face it, anyone who doesn't mind smelling like the local tannery. You splash some water on your face from a wooden bucket, hoping to wash away the sleep and not contract anything worse in the process. Hygiene in the 14th century is an optimistic concept at best, and a breeding ground for fleas at worst. Speaking of optimism, let's dive into the morning grind. You're a peasant, which means you've got the joy of working someone else's land from sunrise to sunset. The term, free time, is about as real as a unicorn in these parts. Your daily routine involves navigating the feudal system's demands, which are about as forgiving as a medieval gallows. Before breakfast, you're already out in the fields, tilling soil that's as stubborn and unyielding as your landlord. And just when you think it can't get any worse, remember, it's 1348, and the plague is here for a very unwelcome visit. Now, let's talk numbers. The Black Death, as it would later be known, is not just a local pest. It's the Grim Reaper's grand tour across continents. Originating in the arid landscapes of Central Asia, it hitched a ride on the Silk Road, making its grand entrance into Europe in 1347. By 1351, it would claim an astonishing 25 million European souls, nearly a third of the continent's population. Imagine trying to socially distance when your entire household fits into a single room. Spoiler alert, it doesn't end well. This brings us to the plague doctors. The iconic image of the beaked masks, more costume party than effective medical practice. These guys were the medieval equivalent of a placebo. Their bird-like masks stuffed with aromatic herbs were more about keeping the stench at bay than curing anything. They thought the plague was spread by miasma, or bad air. In reality, it was those pesky fleas on the backs of rats that were the real culprits. But who are we to judge their fashion choices when we've got our own questionable trends? Medical knowledge in the 14th century could best be described as winging it. The doctors were as much in the dark as the patients they treated, relying on concoctions and remedies that ranged from mildly ineffective to downright dangerous. Bloodletting was all the rage, based on the theory that a little blood loss could rid the body of its foul humors. Spoiler alert, it didn't. But hey, at least you got a free leech with every consultation. As you head out to the fields, you might hear whispers about the plague's origins. Some say it's divine retribution for humanity's sins. Others blame the alignment of the planets. There's even talk of it being a punishment from the stars. Astrology playing a bigger role in medicine than actual science. It's a time when superstition holds more sway than logic, and fear spreads faster than any disease. Your morning continues with the usual chores, tending to crops, feeding livestock, and trying to avoid the landlord who's more interested in your taxes than your health. Breakfast is a simple affair, if you're lucky enough to have it. A hunk of bread, maybe some cheese, and a prayer that the plague doesn't come knocking today. The Grim Reaper might be making house calls, but life in the 14th century doesn't stop for anything or anyone. So there you have it, a morning in the life of a peasant during the Black Plague. It's a world where the only certainty is uncertainty, and survival is a daily battle against both nature and the supernatural. As you head back to your chores, remember, every day above ground is a good day, even if the ground feels like it's crumbling beneath your feet. As the sun climbs to its zenith, signaling that midday is nigh, you take a moment to catch your breath in the fields. You might even pause to ponder the economic aftershocks of this merry little plague that's been decimating your social calendar. Spoiler, it's not all doom and gloom, unless you're a merchant watching your trade routes shrivel faster than a snail in a salt mine. Let's talk sharp, or rather, the lack thereof. The Black Death took a sledgehammer to European trade routes, turning bustling markets into ghost towns. Think of it as the Middle Ages' very own supply chain disaster, without the benefit of Zoom meetings to hash out solutions. With an estimated 30-60% of Europe's population taking an extended dirt nap, there's not exactly a queue of eager consumers waiting to haggle over the price of spices or silk. Trade practically hit the brakes, and the once bustling Silk Road turned into more of a silk cul-de-sac. But wait, there's a silver lining to this plague-ridden cloud, especially if you're one of the lucky few still drawing breath. With so many of your fellow laborers now residing 6 feet under, labor shortages have skyrocketed. This is your moment, dear peasant. The tables have turned, and suddenly you're holding all the cards, or at least a few more than you had before. Wages are on the rise, and for once, the phrase workers' rights doesn't seem like a medieval punchline. Your bargaining power is as robust as it's ever been, turning the once invincible feudal lords into more accommodating employers, possibly even adding an extra egg to your meager breakfast. However, let's not get carried away with visions of peasants lounging in luxury. Sure, wages increased, but so did the price of, well, everything. Food, land, and basic goods became more costly, thanks to that pesky law of supply and demand. So while you might be earning more, you're also spending more, just trying to keep fleas from hosting raves in your bedding. Still, the social tapestry of Europe was forever altered. The rigid class structures that had locked peasants into their roles for generations began to fray, allowing for a bit of upward mobility. Think of it as a medieval social ladder, except with fewer rungs and more splinters. What about those romanticized, simpler pleasures we love to swoon over? Picture a world where life is reduced to basic joys. The warmth of a hearth, the laughter of children, oh, who are we kidding? When everyone's main goal is to dodge a flea-born apocalypse, the charm of simpler living quickly loses its luster. Forget pastoral bliss, it's more like pastoral panic. The idea that medieval folk were somehow content with their lot is as mythical as dragons and chivalric knights. Life was short, brutal, and often involved a lot of running, usually away from something infectious. In this period of chaos and transformation, people began to question the very structures that had previously seemed as immutable as the stars. Feudalism, that grand old system of lords and vassals, was teetering, and while the plague gets most of the credit for this upheaval, it was also the cumulative effect of years of dissatisfaction with a system that favored the few at the expense of the many. Talk about a historical plot twist. So here you are, a peasant in the 14th century, standing on the precipice of change. The world is shifting beneath your very feet, and while it might not be the revolution of your dreams, it's certainly not a nightmare. The plague has upended the social order, sowing the seeds of what would eventually blossom into the modern world. But for now, keep your head down and your scythe sharp, because while the lords might be a little more accommodating these days, the Grim Reaper is still making his rounds. As you make your way back to the fields, savor this moment of relative prosperity. It might not last, but for now, you're part of a new era where the balance of power is shifting, ever so slightly, in your favor. The world is changing, and while not all of it is for the better, it's a reminder that even in the darkest times, there's room for a little light to shine through. Keep your wits about you and your hopes tempered, because, in the end, it's all about survival, and maybe a little bit of bargaining power, too. As the sun slinks into the afternoon sky, casting elongated shadows that dance with the same erratic energy as your neighbor's unruly goat, it's time to delve into the delightful world of medieval medicine. If you've ever wondered what passed for healthcare during the Black Plague, Buckle up, because it's a wild ride through the annals of human creativity or desperation, depending on how you look at it. Let's kick things off with a classic, the aromatic charm of the plague posies. These were essentially medieval potpourri, small bouquets of herbs and flowers, tucked into pockets or worn around the neck, believed to ward off the disease. The idea was that sweet-smelling blooms would counteract the dreaded miasma, or bad air, thought to carry the plague. While it didn't do much against the actual bacteria, it likely made the wearer a tad more pleasant to stand next to, assuming you dared to stand close to anyone in 1348. Speaking of scents, vinegar was the medieval multitasker when it came to plague prevention. People bathed in it, swigged it, and even used it to wash their hands when they bothered with such frivolities. Vinegar was the medieval equivalent of today's obsession with essential oils, a catch-all solution for whatever ailed you, even if its efficacy was more psychological than medicinal. In fairness, given the alternatives, a vinegar bath probably seemed like a spa day. But what about the folks who wanted something a little more potent? Enter the bizarre world of animal-based cures. Snakes, frogs, and even toads were considered fair game in the quest for health. One particularly delightful remedy involved strapping a dead frog to your bubonic bubo, those nasty, swollen lymph nodes that were the plague's calling card. The idea was that the frog would absorb the disease. In reality, it just left you with a smelly frog carcass tied to your body. Effective, not so much. Memorable, absolutely. Of course, not all advice was quite so creative. Some folks turned to the stars for answers. Astrology, not just a modern-day hobby for horoscope enthusiasts, played a significant role in medieval medicine. The alignment of planets and stars was thought to affect health, with certain positions considered particularly perilous. This celestial scapegoating wasn't exactly a cure, but it provided some cosmic context to the chaos. Now, let's not forget the heavy hitters of medieval society, the church. Religion was the omnipresent backdrop to every medieval drama, and the plague was no exception. On the one hand, the church offered comfort, with priests encouraging prayer and penance as a means to ward off the disease. Divine intervention was seen as the ultimate cure, with the hope that a few extra Hail Marys might spare you the worst. On the flip side, the church also played the blame game. The plague was often interpreted as God's divine wrath, a celestial smiting for the sins of humanity. This wasn't exactly the pick-me-up that the average peasant needed, but it did inspire a wave of self-flagellation among those convinced that a little self-inflicted pain might appease an angry deity. Spoiler, it didn't. The church's influence wasn't just spiritual. It also had a hand in shaping public health policies, or what passed for them at the time. In an effort to curb the spread, some towns implemented quarantine measures, restricting movement and isolating the sick. This was a sensible approach, if a bit late to the party. The problem: these efforts were inconsistent and often undermined by fear and superstition. And speaking of superstition, the plague brought out the very best and worst of human nature. Scapegoating became a popular pastime, with various groups blamed for the disease's spread. Jews, in particular, faced horrific persecution, accused of poisoning wells and conspiring to destroy Christian society. These baseless accusations led to violent pogroms, a tragic reminder of how fear can fuel the fires of prejudice and hatred. It's easy to look back and scoff at such medieval absurdities, but before we get too smug, let's take a moment to reflect on our own modern misconceptions. From miracle diets to dubious detoxes, we're not so different from our ancestors, clinging to the hope that simple solutions can solve complex problems. We may have swapped posies for probiotics, but the desire for an easy fix remains as potent as ever. As you ponder these parallels, the sun begins its descent, casting a golden glow over the fields. The workday might be winding down, but the battle against the plague is far from over. With each feudal remedy and misplaced blame, the disease continues its relentless march across Europe, a grim reminder of the limits of human understanding and the enduring power of fear. The afternoon draws to a close, leaving you with a head full of fragrant myths and the pungent reality of vinegar baths. The world may be steeped in superstition, but it's also on the cusp of transformation. As the shadows lengthen and the air cools, you can't help but wonder what future generations will say about the choices we make in the face of calamity. For now, you'll have to settle for the hope that tomorrow brings a little more wisdom and a little less vinegar. As evening slips in and the day's final embers fade, it's time to pivot from vinegar-soaked myths to the seismic shifts rattling Europe's political landscape. The Black Death didn't just wipe out a staggering 25 to 50 million souls. It also threw a wrench into the gears of medieval power structures, making monarchs and peasants alike question the divine right of kings and the rigidity of feudal barns. Imagine a continent where the plague didn't just kill people, it killed the old ideas that kept them in their place. First, let's talk about the lords and ladies who once called the shots. These folks found their grip on power slipping faster than a bar of soap in a medieval bathhouse. When your workforce is decimated and your tax base takes a nosedive, even the grandest castle starts to feel like a house of cards. The noble class had to scramble to maintain control over their dwindling serfs, those very same serfs who, ironically, were starting to realize they could demand more for their labor. Cue the labor revolts, where peasants began to rise up, pitchforks in hand, and say, "Not today, my liege." One sterling example is the English Peasants' Revolt of 1381, spurred by unfair taxes and post-plague economic pressures. It was a classic case of the underdog taking a swing at the overlord. Richard Roman II, the teenage king at the time, faced down a mob of angry peasants who were fed up with coughing up more than they had. Although the revolt didn't topple the monarchy, it sent a clear message. The status quo was teetering, and the peasants wouldn't mind giving it a good shove. Speaking of taxes, let's not forget that the plague left a fiscal black hole. With fewer taxpayers around, governments had to get creative, or desperate, with revenue collection. This desperate attempt to patch up royal treasuries often backfired, leading to more uprisings and a general sense of, why are we paying these guys again? People started questioning whether their rulers were truly chosen by God or just lucky enough to be born into the right family. The divine right of kings began to look like more of a questionable suggestion than unquestionable truth. But wait, there's more. Because when the political chips are down, that's when the real innovation begins. Enter a new wave of political thought, one that dared to challenge the old order. As the plague weakened the feudal system, it inadvertently sparked ideas that would eventually lead to the Renaissance. Picture a world where the grip of the church and crown loosens, allowing for a little more intellectual elbow room. Philosophers and thinkers started to play with radical ideas like humanism and individualism, concepts that would eventually shape the modern world. Now, why did the plague help pave the way for this intellectual leap? Simple. Necessity is the mother of invention. As the old systems crumbled, people began to seek new ways of understanding the world and their place in it. With the church's stranglehold on knowledge waning, thanks in part to its failure to explain or stop the plague, scholars started to look elsewhere for answers. Enter a burgeoning interest in the sciences and the arts, laying the groundwork for the Renaissance. This wasn't just a change in how people thought, it was a change in what they thought was possible. The Renaissance, which blossomed in the late 14th and 15th centuries, was all about rebirth of art, science, and human potential. You can thank the plague for giving folks the push they needed to step back and say, maybe we should rethink this whole world is flat and ruled by divine whim thing. It nudged humanity toward a more secular, exploratory mindset, one that would eventually bring us towering figures like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo. And let's be real, these guys wouldn't have had the same impact in a world where the church still held all the cards. The shifting power dynamics meant that patrons, wealthy merchants, and emerging middle classes were now in a position to support the arts. With the church's grip loosening, there was room for more secular art, more scientific inquiry, and a richer tapestry of human expression. The Renaissance wasn't just a cultural movement. It was a political one, too, fueled by the shifting sands left in the plague's wake. So as the stars begin to twinkle above the medieval landscape, casting a faint glow over fields and villages alike, ponder this. A disease that brought Europe to its knees also set it on a path toward unprecedented growth and enlightenment. It's a testament to the indomitable human spirit, always ready to find light, even in the darkest of times. Keep this in mind as we move forward. The plague didn't just reshuffle the deck, it changed the entire game. The evening might signal the end of another day in your medieval life, but it's also a metaphor for a world on the brink of new beginnings. And as we look toward tomorrow, remember, History has a funny way of showing us that sometimes the biggest catastrophes can lead to the most profound transformations. But for now, let's leave the rest of the story for another day, because there's still plenty of ground to cover and myths to bust. Stay tuned, because the juiciest bits of history are yet to come. And so, as the medieval moon casts its silvery glow over the plague-ravaged fields, it's time to reflect on a continent clawing its way back from the brink. The Black Death may have been the ultimate party crasher, but it also sparked a surprisingly resilient recovery. Europe, like a phoenix with a penchant for flea collars, began to rise from the ashes. This isn't a fairy tale of instant transformation. Think more slow-cooked stew than microwave meal. But the seeds of renewal were sown in the charred soil left behind by the plague. Take the agricultural revolution, for instance, with so many fields lying fallow, thanks to their former tenders being otherwise occupied in the great beyond. Landowners had to get creative. The concept of crop rotation, already kicking around but not universally applied, finally gained traction. It was like medieval farmers' almanac on steroids. By alternating crops, the soil remained fertile, boosting yields and eventually population recovery. And as the population rebounded, so did the demand for goods, dragging the economy out of its plague-induced stupor. Now, let's not gloss over the gritty details. Recovery wasn't a straight line. It was more of a chaotic scribble on the parchment of history. The labor shortages that followed the plague led to innovations in farming techniques, as landowners were forced to maximize output with fewer hands. These innovations weren't driven by altruism, but necessity. After all, necessity is the mother of invention, and it seems she had a particularly demanding brood in the 14th century. The heavy plough, three-field system, and various water mills were the medieval equivalents of today's tech startups, revolutionizing the way people did business. Speaking of innovation, this period also saw the rise of the middle class. That's right, the same plague that decimated populations also created opportunities for those left standing. With labor in high demand, wages rose, and former serfs found themselves with a few extra coins jingling in their pockets. Enterprising individuals seized the moment to invest in trade and crafts, giving birth to a burgeoning bourgeoisie. These fledgling merchants and artisans would later play pivotal roles in ushering in the Renaissance, proving that every cloud really does have a silver lining, or at least a more lucrative labor market. But before we get too misty-eyed about this medieval comeback story, let's tackle a few myths. First, the idea that Europe was completely devastated and never recovered is about as accurate as a medieval map. Sure, the plague was catastrophic, but human adaptability is nothing short of remarkable. Cities didn't vanish into the ether, they evolved, albeit with a few more skeletons in their closets. Trade routes reopened, albeit tentatively, and while it took decades for population numbers to bounce back they did. The survivors were tougher, savvier, and a bit more skeptical of the status quo. And what about the enduring image of a plague-ridden Europe filled with despair and death? Well, it's not entirely fiction, but it's certainly not the whole picture. Amidst the chaos, there were sparks of hope and resilience. Communities banded together, not just for survival, but to rebuild and renew. The human spirit, with its peculiar blend of stubbornness and ingenuity, proved to be as indomitable as ever. As one chronicler put it, when the world burns, we build anew. Or perhaps they were just tired of dodging fleas and decided it was time for an upgrade. As Europe crawled toward recovery, the long-lasting effects of the plague began to take root. The newfound emphasis on hygiene, though still a far cry from modern standards, marked a shift in public health attitudes. Sure, soap was still a luxury, but the link between cleanliness and disease prevention started to gain traction, even if it was more anecdotal than scientific. And while it would take centuries for germ theory to emerge, the seeds of skepticism toward old medical practices were planted, waiting for the right conditions to sprout. It's a bit like trying to convince yourself that kale smoothies are good for you. Eventually, the idea sticks. Meanwhile, the social and political landscape was undergoing its own metamorphosis. The rigid class structures of the past were eroding, thanks in part to the labor shortages and economic upheavals wrought by the plague. Peasants began to realize that they weren't just cogs in the feudal machine, they had leverage. And with that leverage came the ability to demand better conditions, higher wages, and on occasion, a bit more respect from their lords. The old feudal barns were loosening, paving the way for a more dynamic social order. It's as if the plague handed medieval Europe a sledgehammer and said, "Go ahead, shake things up a bit." But let's not romanticize this too much. The road to recovery was fraught with challenges, setbacks, and more than a few missteps. Yet through it all, the people of 14th century Europe displayed a resilience that would resonate through the ages. They didn't just survive. They adapted, innovated, and ultimately laid the groundwork for a future that, while still peppered with plagues of its own, will be brighter and more prosperous. Now, as we wrap up this whirlwind tour of plague-era Europe, let's indulge in a little time travel. Imagine what a 14th century peasant would make of our modern plagues. Bad Wi-Fi. Try explaining why you can't send a meme to your friend across the village. A dead smartphone battery. Picture the horror of not being able to post your latest harvest on Instagram. And let's not even get started on buffering. The medieval mind would likely be baffled by our dependency on technology, and perhaps a bit relieved that their biggest worry was a rat-infested granary rather than a slow-loading web page. So, as you tuck yourself into your 21st century bed, take a moment to appreciate the legacy of those who came before us. The Black Death was a crucible that tested human resilience, ingenuity, and spirit. It reshaped societies, economies, and belief systems, setting the stage for the world we know today. And while it may not have been the most pleasant chapter in history, it was undeniably a pivotal one. As we face our own modern challenges, from pandemics to political upheavals, let's draw inspiration from the past and remember that, much like our medieval ancestors, we too have the capacity to rebuild, renew, and rise anew. So here's to resilience, recovery, and the indomitable human spirit. And maybe, just maybe, a little less vinegar in our future. The sun's barely kissed the horizon, and already the Roman Forum is a symphony of chaos. Dawn is when the serious business begins, and as a merchant, you're right in the thick of it. The Forum, sprawling like the beating heart of the empire, is a mishmash of voices, smells, and colors. It's not just a marketplace. It's where politics, gossip, and commerce collide with the subtlety of a gladiatorial match. First things first, you've got to secure your spot. Prime real estate here means everything. Success or failure, feast or famine. It's like trying to snag a front row seat at a sold-out concert, except instead of tickets, we're talking about muscle and bribery. Competition is fierce, and even though you've paid your fee to the Ediles, those lovely folks who manage public buildings and games, you're not in the clear. You also might have to slide a few coins under the table to keep the local thugs, security forces off your back. This is Rome, after all, where the bureaucracy is as complex as a Caesar's toga. With your spot secured, it's time to set up shop. Forget about the convenience of a pop-up tent. You've got wooden stalls and awnings to arrange. It's a bit like playing Tetris, but with more backache. And speaking of backs, let's not forget the goods you've hauled from who knows where. Silk from the east, olive oil from Hispania, wine from Gaul. The range is dizzying, a testament to Rome's voracious appetite for the exotic. You're not just selling wares, you're peddling the Roman dream, one amphora at a time. Now, as you lay out your goods, you might marvel at the sheer scale of the Forum. It's not just any market, it's the market. The Basilica Julia looms nearby, a giant hall with enough space to host law courts and business dealings all under one roof. That's right, justice and commerce, side by side, proving once again that in Rome, everything is for sale, including, some might say, justice itself. Over there is the Temple of Saturn, the state treasury, the piggy bank of the Roman Empire. It's a comforting thought, knowing the empire's wealth is just a stone's throw away, though it's not exactly up for grabs. With your stall up and running, the day's rhythm begins. It's a dance of numbers and negotiation. You've got your trusty abacus, the ancient calculator that makes sure you're not shortchanged by clever customers. Forget the romantic idea of quick mental math. This is business, and precision is key. Weights and measures are your bread and butter, literally. The Romans have standardized measures, but everyone knows the game. Subtle tweaks and adjustments happen, and every merchant's got a trick or two. But hold on before you start dreaming of denarii pouring in. Remember those taxes. Rome loves its taxes, and as a merchant, you're right in the crosshairs. There's the portoria, a customs duty on goods entering the city. And don't forget the publicani, private tax collectors who make sure you're not skimming off the top. These guys are the IRS of ancient Rome, and they don't take kindly to creative accounting. The forum is alive with the chatter of buyers and sellers haggling over prices. It's a cacophony of Latin, Greek, and the occasional grunt of a foreign tongue. You need to be part linguist, part psychologist, and all business. The air is thick with the aroma of spices and sweat, and you can almost taste the ambition wafting through the alleyways. As the morning rolls on, you might catch a glimpse of senators striding through, their togas billowing like sails. These are the power brokers, the movers and shakers, though they are more interested in political maneuverings than your fine Corinthian leather. But make no mistake, the decisions made here ripple through the empire, affecting everything from the price of grain to the fate of nations. So you hustle, you bargain, and you sell. The forum is an ecosystem, and you're a vital part of it. It's exhausting, exhilarating, and sometimes downright ridiculous. But in the chaos, there's a kind of order, a rhythm that's as old as Rome itself. And as the sun climbs higher, you know this is just the beginning of another day in the dizzying, dazzling world of a Roman merchant. The sun's now a fiery giant overhead, and as you wipe a bead of sweat from your brow, it's time to dive deeper into the economics of your trade. Being a merchant in ancient Rome isn't just about standing behind a stall and shouting, "Fresh olives." It's a high-stakes game of strategy, economics, and a bit of luck, like playing chess, but with more sweat and fewer bishops. Let's talk brass tacks, costs and profits. Everything starts with your goods, right? Take that amphora of olive oil from Hispania. It's not just a matter of plucking it from an olive grove and calling it a day. There are transportation costs, tariffs, and of course, the small army of people required to get it from point A to your stall in the forum. And by people, I mean slaves. Yes, the not-so-glamorous engine of the Roman economy. Slaves do the heavy lifting, literally. And while they don't draw a salary, there are costs involved in keeping them fed and not dropping from exhaustion. It's a harsh reality that underpins the Roman dream, one amphora at a time. Speaking of costs, let's not forget the tolls on the Roman roads, the veins and arteries of the empire. The Romans didn't just build roads, they built the superhighways of the ancient world, stretching over 250,000 miles. That's a lot of paving stones. But here's the kicker. Using them wasn't free. You had to cough up a few sestertii at various points to keep your goods rolling toward Rome. It's like paying highway tolls, but instead of a booth, you've got some toga-clad fella holding out his hand. Now, when those goods finally arrive at your stall, it's time to set prices. Rome had a variety of coins jingling around, from the silver denarius to the bronze as. The denarius was your big spender's coin, while the as was more for the everyday purchase, like a loaf of bread or a pat on the back. And then there's the sestrius, the coin of the people, often used for larger transactions. Knowing which coin your customers are likely to use is part art, part science, and all guesswork. Haggling, the ancient art of two people arguing over how much money one should part with. It's as Roman as aqueducts and gladiators. Prices aren't fixed, and the first rule of haggling is simple: never take the first offer. The second rule: don't get caught without your abacus, because mental math is for philosophers and dreamers, and you're neither. You're a merchant, and precision is your bread and butter. Ever-changing market demands and political edicts also keep you on your toes. Grain shortages, that'll spike your bread prices. New tax laws, better adjust your margins. And let's not even mention the whims of the Senate, who can declare one day that Egyptian papyrus is out, and bam, your stockpile of scrolls is suddenly worth less than a Roman bath token. It's a game of constant adjustment, a dance where the music can change without warning. But hey, who said being a merchant was easy? You're not just selling goods, you're navigating a complex web of economics and politics. And while it might seem like chaos, there's a method to the madness, a system as intricate as a Roman mosaic. So, as you tally your coins and eye the endless stream of potential customers, remember, you're not just part of the Roman economy. You're one of its unsung heroes, keeping the wheels of commerce turning despite the odds. As the sun begins to dip, casting long shadows over the forum, you might catch a moment to reflect on the day. Sure, there's the romance of the Roman forum, the grandeur, the history, the larger-than-life personalities. But there's also the reality, the sweat, the stress, and the relentless drive to make a few more sestertii. It's a harsh yet fascinating world where every coin counts, every transaction is a performance, and every day is a new episode in the ongoing saga of a Roman merchant's life. As you pack up your stall, you can't help but feel a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. Tomorrow, after all, is another day in the Eternal City's grand bazaar of dreams and schemes. As you pack up your stall in the Roman Forum, the sun casting long shadows like an artist with a flair for the dramatic, you can't help but think about the social circus you've been a part of all day. It's not just about the commerce, it's about who you're rubbing shoulders with, or in some cases, who you're desperately trying to avoid. Welcome to the swirling social dynamics of the Forum, where senators, plebeians, and tourists all jostle for space and influence, mixing like a Roman stew that's equal parts ambition and opportunity. First up, let's talk about those senators. You know, the ones who glide through the Forum like they've got the Roman guards themselves on speed dial. These guys are the power brokers, the decision makers, the ones who can make or break your business with a flick of their toga. They're not exactly in the market for your fine Corinthian leather, but their presence is a reminder that politics and commerce are forever intertwined. Think of them as the original influencers, except instead of Instagram, they've got the Senate floor. Now, if you're a merchant looking to level up, you'd better start figuring out how to network with these folks. It's all about who you know, not just what you sell. Enter the patron-client system, Rome's answer to LinkedIn. Basically, a patron is someone with power and influence, and a client is someone who needs a leg up. You scratch the patron's back, maybe by providing goods at a discount or offering a little gift. And in return, they might throw you a bone, like a lucrative contract or some protection from the tax collectors breathing down your neck. It's a system built on mutual need, a delicate dance of favors and obligations, as intricate as a Roman mosaic. But don't get too starry-eyed about the idea of having a patron. It's not all wine and roses. The patron-client relationship is a bit like owing a favor to the mob. There's always a price to pay. Sure, a patron can offer protection and advancement, but they can also demand loyalty and services at the drop of a laurel wreath. It's a balancing act, and one wrong move could see you out in the cold faster than you can say, "Et tu, brute." And what about the plebeians, the everyday Romans who throng the Forum? These are your bread-and-butter customers, the ones who haggle over every sestertius like it's the last coin in the empire. They might not have the power of a senator or the connections of a patron, but they make up for it in sheer numbers. Winning their favor is essential, and it's not just about offering the best goods at the best prices. It's about building relationships, being seen as fair and trustworthy, the kind of merchant who doesn't pull the old bait-and switch with weights and measures. In other words, don't be the guy who sells watered-down wine and then wonders why his stall is mysteriously empty. Tourists, too, wander through the Forum, wide-eyed and ready to be dazzled by the wonders of Rome. For them, everything is new and exciting, and they're often willing to spend a little more for the genuine Roman experience, or what they think is genuine, anyway. Selling to tourists is an art form, a blend of storytelling and salesmanship. You've got to sell not just a product, but a piece of Rome itself, wrapped in a narrative as compelling as any myth. Speaking of myths, let's not forget the impact of public speeches, religious festivals, and political events on the daily grind of trade. The Forum isn't just a marketplace, it's the stage for the grandest performances in Rome. Take public speeches, for instance. When a senator or politician wants to sway the masses, or just hear themselves talk, they head to the rostra, a platform in the Forum. Crowds gather, eager to hear the latest pronouncements. For a merchant, this is both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, more people means more potential customers. On the other, it's harder to make a sale when everyone's craning their necks toward the rostra, hanging on every word like it's the next big thing. Religious festivals are another wild card in the merchant's game. Rome loves its gods, and there's a festival for just about everything. These events can draw massive crowds to the Forum, which is great for business, if you've got the right goods. Selling wine during Bacchanalia, jackpot. Trying to offload pork during Saturnalia when everyone's fasting. Good luck with that. It's all about timing, and knowing the Roman calendar is as essential as knowing your stock. Then there are the political events, the moments that can send ripples through the economy faster than a Roman chariot on a smooth road. Elections, trials, proclamations, each one has the power to shift the tides of commerce. A new law might regulate trade, or a senator's downfall could open up opportunities for new alliances. It's a constantly shifting landscape, one where you've got to keep your ear to the ground and your wits about you. So there you have it, the Roman Forum, a microcosm of the empire itself. It's not just about selling goods. It's about navigating a complex web of social dynamics, leveraging relationships, and staying one step ahead in a world where fortunes can change as quickly as the wind shifts direction. Tomorrow promises another day of challenges and opportunities, a fresh chapter in the saga of life as a Roman merchant. As you shrug off the day's exhaustion and head home, you know you'll be back at it with the dawn, ready to dance once more to the rhythm of Rome's beating heart. As you shrug off the day's exhaustion and head home, you might start to wonder if the Forum's glamour is just a well-polished facade over a pit of serpents. Because here's the truth. When it comes to Roman commerce, it's not all sunshine and laurel wreaths. Beneath the marble and majesty lies a swirling undercurrent of crime and corruption that'd make a pirate blush. Sure, you've got the grand imagery of the Forum as a beacon of culture and wealth, but let's not sugarcoat it. The place is also a haven for every swindler with a toga and a dream. The Roman Forum was the Wall Street of the ancient world, and just like our modern-day financial districts, it had its share of shady dealings. Take the case of Marcus Licinius Crassus, the original rags-to-riches story, if you consider rags to mean inherited wealth and riches to mean obscene fortune. Crassus made a killing, literally and figuratively, in real estate. After fires ravaged buildings, Crassus would swoop in, offering to buy the property at a bargain price. Of course, he had his own fire brigade, who conveniently wouldn't start working until the owner agreed to sell. It was a classic case of disaster capitalism, Roman style. But Crassus wasn't the only one playing fast and loose with ethics. Merchants in the Forum often engaged in some creative accounting. Imagine you're buying grain. The merchant's weights are subtly altered, not enough to notice at first, but enough to shave a little off the top for the seller. It's like getting a scoop of gelato with a hollow center. And while the Romans did have laws against this sort of thing, cheating on weights and measures could get you fined or worse. The enforcement was as consistent as a Roman weather forecast. Now, let's talk about the legendary Roman integrity. Sure, the 12 tables, the foundational statutes of Roman law, were supposed to keep everyone in line. But as any seasoned merchant will tell you, laws were more like guidelines. The reality was a marketplace rife with market manipulation. Prices could be fixed faster than you could say denarius, and collusion among merchants was as common as sandals in the summer. One of the more colorful scandals involved a wine merchant named Lucius. Lucius was known for selling imported wines, but his secret was mixing local plonk with a splash of something exotic and slapping a premium price on it. When he got caught, the punishment wasn't a slap on the wrist, it was exile. Rome didn't just frown on fraud, they exiled it, sometimes literally. But if you think Roman justice was swift and fair, think again. The rich could often buy their way out of trouble while the poor took the fall. The courts were more like theaters where the best actors won. If you had the right friends or enough money, you could sway a verdict. Sound familiar? It's a tale as old as commerce itself, where wealth often trumps truth. As for the punishments, they varied. Minor offenses might get you a fine, while serious fraud could see you branded or, in extreme cases, executed. And let's not forget the social consequences. Being caught in a scandal could ruin a reputation faster than you could say, Ave Caesar. Yet despite the corruption, the Forum thrived. Maybe it's the allure of the hustle, the thrill of the deal, or simply the result of human nature, drawn as it is to both order and chaos. The Forum was a place where fortunes could be made and lost in the blink of an eye. It was a world where every merchant had to be part entrepreneur, part gladiator, fighting not with swords but with wits and wiles. So, the next time you imagine the Roman Forum as a pristine center of commerce and civility, remember this. Beneath its marble columns and bustling stalls lay a world as complex and convoluted as the empire itself. A world where ambition and avarice walked hand in hand, and where the line between legitimate business and outright fraud was often as thin as a senator's patience. As you prepare for another day in this bustling, maddening, utterly mesmerizing world, you know that the Forum will continue to be what it always has been, a stage where the drama of human ambition plays out with all its triumphs, failures, and intrigue. And in that, there's a kind of beauty, a rhythm to the chaos that has endured through the ages. Because where else but in the heart of Rome could one find such a perfect blend of the sacred and the profane, the honest and the deceitful, all vying for a piece of history's grand tapestry. As you prepare for another day in this bustling, maddening, utterly mesmerizing world, you know that the Forum will continue to be what it always has been. A stage where the drama of human ambition plays out with all its triumphs, failures, and intrigue. And in that, there's a kind of beauty, a rhythm to the chaos that has endured through the ages. Because where else, but in the heart of Rome, could one find such a perfect blend of the sacred and the profane, the honest and the deceitful, all vying for a piece of history's grand tapestry? As the last rays of the sun slip away like a well-timed exit from a party that's starting to wind down, the Forum begins to exhale. Merchants like you pack up their stalls, counting coins with fingers that are as nimble as a thief's, but hopefully more honest. Sure, you've had your share of bartering successes, and a few too many close shaves with the tax collectors, but that's just a day in the life here. The hustle never really sleeps, it just waits for sunrise. It's hard not to reflect on the grandeur and grit of the Forum as you watch the crowds thin. This place is more than a marketplace. It's the beating heart of Roman society, where plebeians and patricians alike dance to the same economic tune. The Forum is a testament to Rome's ingenuity, a place where traders, philosophers, and politicians all rub elbows, and sometimes throw them. Here, the pulse of commerce is felt with every clink of a coin, and every deal struck under the watchful eyes of the guards, or at least their marble counterparts. But let's not sugarcoat the past with a layer of nostalgia. The Forum wasn't all grandeur and glory. It was also a hotbed of inequality, where the scales of justice often tipped in favor of those with the heaviest purses. Still, it was a place where the dreams of merchants could rise like the columns of the Temple of Saturn, even if they sometimes crumbled under the weight of ambition's harsh realities. As night falls and the Forum's marble facades glow softly in the moonlight, it's worth pondering the legacy this ancient hub left behind. The Roman Forum's influence echoes through time, shaping the very concept of marketplace and civic center. Just think of Wall Street, the Grand Bazaar, or any bustling market square. The DNA of the Forum runs through them all. It's a reminder that the wheels of commerce we set in motion millennia ago are still turning, albeit with fewer togas and more tailored suits. But like all things, the Forum's glory days couldn't last forever. As we stride through history, we encounter the decline of the Forum, mirroring the fall of the Roman Empire itself. By the 4th century, Rome was no longer the epicenter of the world's trade. Political instability, economic troubles, and the rise of the Eastern Roman Empire shifted the trade winds. The bustling nerve center of Roman life began to fade, its marble halls and arches succumbing to the relentless march of time. The empire's center of gravity shifted eastward to Constantinople, the city that would become the new beacon of commerce and culture. As the Western Roman Empire crumbled under the weight of barbarian invasions and internal decay, the Forum's once busy stalls were left to the dust and ghosts of merchants past. The grand structures, once filled with the clamor of trade and politics, became quarries for new constructions, their stones repurposed, as if even marble had a second act. Yet, the Forum's legacy wasn't lost to the ravages of time. The lessons of Roman commerce endured, echoing across the ages. Rome taught us the importance of infrastructure. Its roads, aqueducts, and ports were the arteries of empire, reminding us that connectivity is key. The Romans showed us the art of negotiation, the dance of diplomacy that's as relevant in modern boardrooms as it was in ancient ports. And perhaps most enduringly, they taught us that markets are as much about people as they are about products. So, can today's entrepreneurs glean from the ancient merchants of Rome? For starters, adaptability is crucial. The Roman Forum was nothing if not a testament to the power of innovation and flexibility. Merchants who thrived were those who could pivot with the changing tides, whether that meant adjusting to new tax laws or shifting their wares to match fickle consumer tastes. In a world where the only constant is change, the ability to adapt quickly is a timeless skill. Moreover, the Romans understood the value of relationships. The patron-client system may seem archaic, but the principle remains the same. Networks are powerful. Whether through mentors, investors, or partners, building strong relationships can offer support and open doors that might otherwise remain closed. Finally, there's a lesson in resilience. The Forum stood for centuries, weathering political upheavals, economic shifts, and even the whims of emperors. Modern entrepreneurs can take heart in the fact that setbacks are part of the journey, not the end of it. The entrepreneurial spirit thrives on challenge, and like the merchants of Rome, today's business leaders must navigate an ever-changing landscape with tenacity and grit. As you leave the Forum behind, its silhouette fading into the night, you carry with you the echoes of history, a reminder that the past is never truly past. The Roman Forum may be silent now, but its lessons resonate, whispering through the corridors of time to anyone willing to listen. So when you wake tomorrow, ready to face the modern marketplace, remember that you're part of a legacy that began long ago, in a place where ambition, commerce, and the human spirit collided in a dance as old as civilization itself. Your morning begins with the shrill crow of a rooster, but don't get too cozy. This isn't a leisurely breakfast in bed. You're a medieval miner, and that means your day kicks off long before the sun even thinks about rising. Your first task: stumble out of your hovel, shake the straw out of your hair, and prepare for a back-breaking 12-hour shift underground. That's half a day, or pretty much all the daylight hours, you won't be seeing because you'll be deep in the belly of the earth. Now, let's talk about your pay, because who doesn't love a little financial chat at dawn? For all your efforts, you'll earn a glorious 2 to 3 pence a day. That's barely enough to buy a decent loaf of bread, let alone fund your dreams of medieval luxury. But hey, at least you can afford a candle or two, which you might need because you're going to spend much of your life in the dark. Welcome to the world of mining, where the sun never shines, and the air is a mix of moisture, dust, and the faint whiff of despair. You see, while today's economy might thrive on tech stocks and real estate, back in the medieval era, the big economic engines were metals like silver and lead. These were the backbone of everything from coinage to warfare. Yes, your sweat and toil power the gears of the medieval economy. Kings need silver for their coffers, armies need lead for their crossbow bolts, and you need to not get crushed by a rock. The demand for these metals is so high that entire communities revolve around mining. But let's not romanticize it. This isn't a quaint village with charming cobblestone streets. It's a rough and tumble hub of activity where every man, woman, and child knows someone who's been injured, or worse, in a mine. Safety standards. Ha! The only standard here is trying to make it out alive at the end of your shift. The mines themselves are far from the tourist-friendly caverns you might visit today. Picture narrow, claustrophobic tunnels lit by flickering candlelight. The darkness is so thick it might as well be a physical presence, pressing in on you as you chip away at the rock face. And let's not forget the delightful hazards: cave-ins, flooding, toxic gases, and the ever-present risk of lung diseases from inhaling dust all day. Basically, if the cramped tunnels don't get you, the air just might. And why are you doing all this? Because the medieval economy demands it. The need for metals is driven by more than just the shiny allure of wealth. Silver fuels trade and the creation of coins, while lead is essential for warfare. As medieval Europe engages in endless skirmishes and full-blown wars, the demand for these metals skyrockets. You're not just a miner. You're a cog in the grand machine of medieval power struggles and economic expansion. But let's pull back for a second and consider the bigger picture. The medieval period, spanning roughly from the 5th to the late 15th century, is a time of constant change. Kingdoms rise and fall, the church wields immense power, and feudal lords rule over vast swaths of land. Within this shifting landscape, mining emerges as a critical industry. It's not glamorous, and it certainly doesn't come with a health plan, but it's essential. As you head into the mine, pickaxe in hand, you're not just digging for metal, you're digging for survival. The work is grueling, the pay is meager, but for many it's the only option. With agriculture limited by seasons and unpredictable weather, mining offers a more stable, if perilous, livelihood. And let's be honest, there's a certain camaraderie in shared hardship. You're part of a tight-knit community of workers who face the same dangers day in, day out. Of course, the romantic image of the rugged, resilient miner holds a certain appeal. Legends of brave souls who risked it all for the chance of striking it rich, or at least less poor, persist even today. But the reality, it's a brutal, unforgiving life. You're not sifting through streams for gold nuggets. You're hacking at rock, praying it doesn't hack back. So here you are, in the bowels of the earth, part of a system that's been churning for centuries. Your days are long, your pay is low, and your future is uncertain. Yet amid the dust and darkness, there's a strange sort of pride. You are, after all, fueling the economy and in your own way, shaping history. As you swing your pickaxe, remember, every clang against the stone echoes not just through the tunnels, but through time itself. And there you are, swinging your pickaxe, part of a grand medieval tradition that might just crush you before lunchtime. Let's chat about why this line of work isn't winning any top career in Europe awards, shall we? First off, the air you're breathing, if we can even call it that, has all the charm of a dust storm in a wind tunnel. Miners have a special relationship with lung diseases like pneumoconiosis, a fancy term for your lungs turning into stone. Quite literally, your lungs fill with dust that hardens over time. It's like a medieval version of turning into a statue, but with none of the glory and all of the coughing. Now, while you're hacking away at rock faces, don't get too comfortable. There's always the potential for a cave-in, a delightful surprise that could turn you into a permanent part of the mine's decor. Miners had to contend with these precarious conditions daily, and they didn't have the luxury of modern engineering to prevent it. No steel reinforcements or hard hats here, just a prayer to St. Barbara, the patron saint of miners. Why St. Barbara? The legend has it she was locked in a tower by her father and later struck by lightning, making her a fitting guardian against sudden, unexpected doom. In case you're wondering, that's the medieval version of insurance. And then there's the ever-present threat of fire damp. Sounds cozy, doesn't it? Like a nice, warm blanket, except it's actually methane gas that builds up in the mines and can ignite with the slightest spark. Forget about finding your fortune. You might just find yourself as part of a medieval fireworks display. If you're lucky enough to escape a fire-damp explosion, there's still the risk that the carbon dioxide-heavy choke damp will quietly suffocate you while you work. It's like Mother Nature's way of saying, are you sure you want to be down here? As you navigate these dangers, you're using tools that are more Flintstones than Jetsons. Picture hammers and picks that way about as much as a small child. And then there's fire setting, a technique where you set fire to the rock face to crack the stone. It's as safe as it sounds, which is to say, not at all. Imagine standing near a rock inferno, hoping the heat will cause the rocks to break up without bringing the whole mine down on your head. Fire setting is a testament to medieval ingenuity, or perhaps desperation. Because when you're out of options, you start setting things on fire. While these tools and techniques seem primitive, they were cutting edge by medieval standards. It's a bit like using a flip phone in the age of smartphones. It gets the job done, but not without a few glitches. And let's not forget about the belief systems that miners clung to in the face of frequent accidents. When your daily existence is a high-stakes gamble, a little superstition goes a long way. Many miners believed that knocking 3 times before entering the mine would ward off bad luck. Others carried charms or wore amulets for protection, as if the universe might decide to spare you for being fashionably accessorized. Despite the dangers, people kept mining because, frankly, there weren't a ton of better options. Agriculture depended on the whims of weather, and crafts required skills not everyone possessed. Mining, for all its perils, offered consistent, if not safe, employment. It was an industry driven by necessity, and let's be honest, a little bit of greed. The lure of precious metals meant that miners were both pawns and players in the larger economic game. They were digging not just for survival, but for the prosperity of entire kingdoms. As you stand in the flickering candlelight, swinging that pickaxe, remember that every cough, every bead of sweat, and every moment of fear is part of a story much larger than yourself. You're contributing to an industry that fuels the medieval economy and shapes the geopolitical landscape. And even though your role might seem small, it's a crucial piece of the puzzle. You're not just a miner. You're a participant in the relentless march of history, where the stakes are high, the risks are many, and the rewards are as elusive as a breath of fresh air. But before you get too swept up in the romance of swinging your pickaxe like a medieval superhero, let's shift the spotlight to the powers that be looming over your every move. The social and legal structures that hem you in tighter than the tunnels you work in. You see, mining wasn't just about breaking rocks. It was also about navigating a labyrinth of rules that would make a Byzantine bureaucrat blush. First up, let's talk miners' guilds. These were the medieval equivalent of a union, but don't start humming Solidarity Forever just yet. The guilds were a mixed bag, part protective shield, part regulatory overlord. They organized miners, set standards for work, and advocated for rights. But they also enforced strict codes of conduct and could be as rigid as the rocks you were chipping away at. Think of them as the gatekeepers of the mining game, holding the keys to whatever semblance of job security you could scrape together. And who do these guilds answer to? Enter the local lords, feudal overlords who saw your sweat-stained labor as nothing more than entry in their ledger books. They own the land, and by extension, everything that came out of it. Every nugget of silver or chunk of lead had their name stamped on it, metaphorically speaking. If you were lucky, a benevolent lord might provide some basic protection and rights. But let's face it, you were more likely to encounter a power-hungry despot whose favorite pastime was squeezing every last ounce of profit out of the earth. And you. These lords could impose taxes and fees that made your already meager wages look like a king's ransom. Picture this. In some regions, up to 50% of the mine material went straight into their coffers. So much for that dream of retiring to a quaint cottage by the sea. More often than not, you were left with just enough to keep body and soul together, and if you were lucky, a pint of ale to wash away the taste of injustice. But don't whip out those pitchforks just yet. The reality of medieval mining was more complex than a simple tale of oppressed versus oppressor. Miners were not mere pawns. They were savvy negotiators who knew how to leverage their indispensability. After all, without them, those lords were just sitting on a pile of rocks. In some cases, miners negotiated rights and protections that seemed downright progressive. For instance, in the mining town of Goslar in Germany, miners were granted the right to elect their own leaders, a small but significant power play in a world dominated by aristocratic whims. Of course, not every negotiation ended with a handshake and a song. Fail to meet the demands of your overlords, and you could face penalties that were as harsh as the working conditions. We're talking fines, imprisonment, or even banishment. And let's not forget the ever-present threat of being conscripted into military service, because nothing says, "Thank you for risking your life underground," like being sent to risk it on a battlefield. Now, let's debunk a persistent myth. The idea of miners as rebellious free spirits, sticking it to the man with their rugged independence. While it makes for a good story, the reality was more nuanced. Yes, there were instances of miners banding together to resist exploitation, but these were exceptions rather than the rule. More often, miners were pragmatists, navigating a system stacked against them with whatever tools, literal and figurative, they had at their disposal. But the myth of miner autonomy isn't without its appeal. It's the stuff of legend, the underdog narrative that tugs at the heartstrings. Who doesn't love the idea of a band of rough-and-tumble workers, defying the odds and the overlords in a bid for freedom? Romantic as it is, the truth was that most miners were too busy surviving to stage grand revolts. They were playing a long game, balancing the need to push back against injustice with the necessity of keeping their jobs and their lives. Yet, amid the grind and the grit, there were moments of true rebellion. Take the famous revolt in the mining town of Kutná Hora in Bohemia. In 1496, miners, fed up with oppressive taxes and working conditions, staged a full-scale revolt. It was a rare, fiery burst of defiance that saw them challenge both their local lords and the king himself. These moments of rebellion were the exception, not the rule, but they left an indelible mark on the historical landscape, a testament to human resilience and the universal desire for a better life. As you navigate this complex social web, you start to see that being a miner is about more than just extracting ore. It's about understanding the intricate dance of power and survival, where every swing of the pickaxe is also a move in a larger game. You're part of a system that's as entrenched as the mineral veins you're chasing, and while you may not have the power to change it overnight, you play your part with grit and determination. So, as you stand at the edge of the mine, ready to descend into the darkness once more, remember that you're not just a miner. You're a participant in a grand historical drama where the stakes are high, the players are many, and the outcome is as uncertain as the treasures hidden deep within the earth. And who knows, maybe, just maybe, you'll be one of the lucky few who strike it rich, not just in silver and lead, but in the satisfaction of having carved out a place in a world that often feels impenetrable. But before you get your hopes too high about unearthing some medieval jackpots, let's dig into the real economic impact of all that backbreaking labor. You see, those rocks you're chipping away at aren't just lining the pockets of greedy lords. They're fueling entire regions. Enter the Harz Mountains, an area so rich in ore that it sparkled on medieval maps like a pirate's treasure trove. This region, located in what is now central Germany, was the medieval equivalent of Silicon Valley, minus the hoodies and startup culture. The Harz Mountains were renowned for their silver mines, which were a literal gold mine for the Holy Roman Empire. Imagine this. By the year 968, the Rammelsburg mine alone was producing around 1,000 tons of silver annually. That's enough shiny metal to keep emperors, traders, and craftsmen grinning like Cheshire cats. And it wasn't just silver. Copper and lead were also extracted, making the region a veritable metal buffet, capable of feeding the insatiable appetites of European economies. So, what's the big deal about a few tons of metal? Well, these metals were the lifeblood of the medieval economy. Silver was crucial for minting coins, the very currency that greased the wheels of trade and allowed kingdoms to flex their economic muscles. Copper, on the other hand, was indispensable for crafting tools, weapons, and every medieval knight's favorite accessory, armor. Let's not even get started on lead, which was used for everything from pipes to stained glass windows. In short, the Harz Mountains were the medieval banking center, pumping out wealth that would shape the geopolitics of the era. Now, let's bust a myth that's as old as the hills themselves, the so-called Dark Ages. When you think of the medieval period, you picture a time of intellectual stagnation and cultural regression. Well, prepare to have your mental map redrawn. The challenges of mining didn't just lead to economic prosperity, they also sparked a wave of technological innovation. Medieval miners were the original tech disruptors, and they didn't even need Wi-Fi. Take, for instance, the water wheel. While it might not sound as sexy as a new iPhone, this simple invention revolutionized mining by providing the power needed to drain water from deep shafts. This allowed miners to dig deeper than ever before, reaching rich veins of ore that were previously out of reach. It was the medieval equivalent of striking oil, and it laid the groundwork for future engineering marvels. So the next time you see a water wheel, give it a nod of respect. It was the unsung hero of medieval mining. And let's not forget about the mining cart. Picture a wooden box on wheels. Hardly groundbreaking, right? But in the medieval context, this was a game changer. By the 16th century, the use of rail tracks to guide these carts was already in place, setting the stage for the railways that would later crisscross the globe. These simple innovations were the seeds of the Industrial Revolution, which would eventually transform societies in ways medieval miners could never have imagined. But hold your horses, or should I say your oxen, because the real breakthroughs came in the form of smelting technology. The development of blast furnaces in the 12th century allowed for more efficient extraction of metal from ore. This not only boosted production, but also improved the quality of the metals produced. Blast furnaces were like the supercomputers of their day. Bigger, faster, and more efficient, they turned raw materials into value-added products at an unprecedented rate. All these innovations paint a picture of a society that was anything but stagnant. Far from being trapped in a dark age, medieval Europe was a hotbed of creativity and ingenuity, driven by the relentless demands of mining. It was a time when necessity truly was the mother of invention, and the mines were the crucible in which new ideas were forged. Of course, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, or candlelight and silver, as it were. The economic boom brought on by mining had its downsides too. For one, the prosperity it generated often ended up enriching the ruling elites rather than the miners themselves. It was a classic case of the rich getting richer, while the poor, well, just got poorer. The wealth extracted from the earth rarely trickled down to those who risked life and limb to bring it to the surface. And let's not gloss over the environmental impact. Medieval mining was about as eco-friendly as a coal-fired power plant, with deforestation, water pollution, and land degradation as part of the package deal. Entire forests were felled to supply wood for the smelting process, leaving barren landscapes in their wake. The environmental toll was a heavy price to pay for progress, and it's a legacy that still haunts us today. But despite these challenges, the economic and technological advancements that emerged from medieval mining were nothing short of transformative. They laid the groundwork for the industrial advances that would follow, proving once and for all that the so-called Dark Ages were anything but. So, as you reflect on your arduous day of mining, take a moment to appreciate the broader impact of your toil. You're not just digging for silver and lead. You're helping to build the foundation of a future that will one day be as bright as the metal you're extracting. And there you have it, a snapshot of the medieval mining industry, warts and all. It was a world of danger, innovation, and economic upheaval, where the stakes were as high as the mountains themselves. And while the romantic notion of the valiant miner might be more fiction than fact, the reality is no less compelling. In the end, the story of medieval mining is a testament to human resilience and ingenuity, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the light of progress is never far away. Stay tuned, because the tale of mining's impact on society is far from over. As the dust settles on our medieval mining saga, let's take a moment to strip away the romantic veneer and get down to the brass tacks, or rather, the silver nuggets. The image of the rugged miner, bravely delving into the bowels of the earth in search of fortune, is as appealing as the idea of finding treasure at the end of a rainbow. But much like that elusive pot of gold, the reality is a bit more complex and a whole lot grittier. For starters, the notion of miners as swashbuckling adventurers is more myth than reality. Picture instead a group of men and women bound not by dreams of wealth, but by the harsh necessity of survival. The labor was arduous, the conditions perilous, and the rewards, well, sparse. Earning a pittance while risking life and limb hardly fits the bill of a grand adventure. Yet within this grim picture lies a testament to human resilience and cleverness. These miners weren't just swinging pickaxes. They were unwitting innovators, paving the way for future industries and technologies. Consider the ingenuity it took to extract ore from deep within the earth with little more than rudimentary tools and sheer willpower. Medieval miners developed techniques that, while primitive by today's standards, were revolutionary in their time. The water wheel, the mining cart, even the blast furnace, all were born out of the necessity to dig deeper and produce more. These innovations might not have come with the fanfare of a modern tech launch, but they laid the groundwork for industrial advances that would change the world. And let's not forget the social fabric woven around these mines. Miners formed tight-knit communities, bound together by the shared hardship of their work. They looked out for one another, creating a network of support in a world where such safety nets were scarce. This camaraderie was crucial, for in the shadowy tunnels, where the light of day rarely penetrated, they relied on each other to navigate the constant dangers. It's a level of solidarity that speaks volumes about the human spirit, shining through even in the darkest of mines. Yet, for all their contributions, the miners themselves often reaped little of the rewards. The wealth they unearthed flowed upwards, lining the pockets of lords, kings, and merchants rather than those who toiled for it. It's a tale as old as time. The laborers bear the brunt, while the elite reap the benefits. But don't let that overshadow the miners' role in shaping history. Their work powered the economies of medieval Europe, fueling wars, trade, and innovation. Fast forward a few centuries, and you'll see that the legacy of these medieval miners is still with us today. Modern mining owes much to the techniques and practices developed in those early days. The machinery is more advanced, the conditions marginally safer, but the fundamental principles remain the same. And so does the allure of striking it rich beneath the earth, a dream that continues to captivate the imagination, even as we acknowledge the harsh realities that accompany it. So, as we wrap up our journey through the medieval mines, let's salute the miners who, despite the odds, carved out a life and a legacy in the unlikeliest of places. They may not have been the romantic figures of legend, but their resilience and ingenuity left an indelible mark on history. In the end, the story of medieval mining is not just about the metals extracted, but about the spirit of the people who dared to delve into the unknown. And that, dear friends, is a tale worth telling. You've got your feet sinking into the muddy fields of 10th century Japan, a time when the word samurai was just beginning to mean something more than a guy with a sharp object. The Heian period is your backdrop, a time as full of palace intrigue as a juicy soap opera. The emperor in Kyoto is technically in charge, but let's be real, he's more of a figurehead than a puppet master. Power is slipping through the imperial fingers, scattering like cherry blossom petals across the countryside. Okay, so here's the scene. The central government is about as effective as a noodle sword, and local warlords, or daimyo, are stepping up to fill the void. This isn't just a case of a few disgruntled landowners. The whole country's in on the act, and these warlords need muscle to keep their shiny new territories in check. Enter the samurai, the warrior class you probably know from movies, but with less CGI and more calluses. Now, let's talk economics, because nothing says romantic warrior like a good balance sheet. The samurai weren't just swinging swords for the fun of it. They were paid in land, which back then was as good as gold. This wasn't just any land, mind you, but tax-exempt land. That's right, the samurai were the original tax dodgers. They'd collect taxes from the peasants living on their land, skim a little off the top for themselves, and send the rest up the chain. It was feudal trickle-down economics at its finest. But before you start painting your mental image of these guys as medieval Robin Hoods, let's pump the brakes. Sure, the samurai had a code, the Bushido, which preached loyalty and honor. But let's not kid ourselves. It wasn't all tea ceremonies and cherry blossoms. These dudes were enforcers, often employing methods that would make a mob boss blush. When they weren't busy collecting taxes, they were securing spoils of war, which is just a fancy way of saying looting whatever wasn't nailed down. Romantic, right? Of course, the system wasn't just a chaotic free-for-all. You had your rules and hierarchies, because even lawlessness needs structure. The samurai were expected to serve their lords with absolute loyalty. In return, they got protection and a bit of prestige. But here's the kicker. If a samurai lost his lord, he became a Ronin, a masterless samurai. And in this world, being a Ronin was like being a freelancer in a town full of salaried workers. Exciting, but mostly terrifying. Let's not forget the day-to-day grind. The samurai life was as much about farming and administration as it was about fighting. They were expected to oversee their lands, settle disputes, and serve in local governance. And when they weren't doing that, they were training. We're talking sunrise to sunset, relentless drills to hone their martial skills. Swordplay, archery, horseback riding. It was an all-you-can-train buffet of combat skills. And you thought your 9-to-5 was demanding. Primary sources from the era, like the tale of the hike, paint this picture with strokes both broad and fine, detailing lives filled with as much grit as glory. The stories of famous samurai often gloss over the less glamorous aspects. Sure, there are tales of honor and bravery, but there's also the reality of lice-infested armor and endless mud. It's a bit like reading the fine print on a credit card offer, fascinating but sobering. So, why did all of this matter? Because the samurai weren't just any group of warriors. They were the glue holding a fragmented Japan together. Their rise marked the beginning of a socio-political shift that would shape the country's future for centuries. The samurai didn't just fight for their daimyo. They carved out a space for themselves in the history books, one skirmish at a time. In essence, the samurai were both the stuff of legend and the reality of harsh living. They were the knights of Japan, but with a distinctly local flavor, more rice paddies than jousting fields. This duality is what makes them so fascinating. On one hand, they're the epitome of the noble warrior, a symbol of discipline and honor. On the other, they're a reminder that history is often more about survival than splendor. So next time you think of the samurai, remember the mud, remember the taxes, and remember the relentless grind. Behind every katana-wielding warrior was a person navigating a world as complex and unforgiving as any modern battlefield. And if that doesn't make you appreciate your comfy bed tonight, I don't know what will. So, while you're getting cozy in your modern-day sanctuary, let's transport ourselves back to the demanding life of a young samurai in training. If you thought your morning commute was rough, try being a 7-year-old in the 12th century with a wooden bow bigger than you are, and a katana that's just waiting to give you a splinter. Welcome to the boot camp of feudal Japan, where childhood innocence is swapped for a strict regimen that would make a drill sergeant weep. From the moment a samurai's child could barely toddle, they were thrown into the world of martial arts. It was like a medieval version of no pain, no gain, except the stakes were a little higher than fitting into your skinny jeans. Archery, or kudo, was often the first discipline. We're talking about kids with arms like noodles learning to pull back a bowstring with the precision of a laser-guided missile. And before you say, how hard could it be? Consider this. Hitting a target while galloping on a horse at full speed was the ultimate goal. Kyudo wasn't just about shooting arrows. It was an art form, a discipline that required relentless focus and zen-like composure. Kind of like yoga, but with more chance of impalement. The legendary katana didn't just hang around looking menacing, either. These kids had to master kenjutsu, the art of sword fighting, which was as graceful as it was deadly. Picture this. Hours of repetitive drills, every swing and block a testament to their growing skill and endurance. It wasn't just about learning to fight. It was about becoming one with the blade, a symbiotic relationship where hesitation could mean disaster. And no, they didn't have safety gear or foam swords, just good old-fashioned steel and the looming threat of an early grave. But the thing is, this training wasn't just physical. It was psychological warfare, too. Discipline was hammered into these young warriors with a ferocity that would make you question the entire parenting manual. They were taught to suppress fear, to endure pain, and to put duty above personal desire. Sounds like a motivational poster gone wrong right. But in a world where survival depended on your ability to wield a sword with the precision of a surgeon and the ruthlessness of a mercenary, there wasn't much room for error or emotion. And here's where we bust a myth wide open. The whole stoic samurai thing. It's kind of a romantic fabrication. Sure, they were expected to show restraint, but let's not pretend they were emotionless automata. The psychological toll was immense. Imagine living under constant pressure to perform, where a slip in discipline could bring dishonor to your family. If you've ever felt your palms sweat during a high-stakes meeting, you can only begin to grasp the anxiety these young warriors faced. Training wasn't just about honing skill. It was about crafting a mindset, a way of life that prioritized the group over the individual. It was about discipline so intense it bordered on brutality. The samurai code, Bushido, demanded nothing less. It was a doctrine that glorified self-sacrifice, loyalty, and honor. But this wasn't the kind of honor you could wear like a badge. It was a grueling, lifelong pursuit that could break you as easily as it could make you. And let's not forget the economic backdrop to all this warrior training. Samurai families weren't just sending their kids off to sword school for kicks. It was an investment, like a very intense college fund. The family name and fortunes were on the line, with their children's future as warriors being their social security plan. A samurai's skill and reputation could mean better lands, more power, and a cushier spot in the pecking order. So every bruise and every callus was, in a way, a down payment on future prosperity. Now, while we're on the topic of myths, let's tackle the notion that samurai lived only for battle. Yes, they trained like their lives depended on it, because they did. But their education was surprisingly well-rounded. They were expected to be literate, to study strategy, philosophy, poetry, and even calligraphy. Think of it as the ancient version of a liberal arts education, with a side of life-or-death combat skills. This intellectual aspect wasn't just a fancy add-on. It was integral to their role as leaders and administrators. The samurai were more than just warriors. They were the governors and bureaucrats of their time, wielding ink and quill with the same precision they brought to the battlefield. The samurai's world was a curious blend of the physical and the cerebral, the brutal and the beautiful. They were expected to appreciate the delicate balance of life and death, to find beauty in a fleeting moment, to write poetry about cherry blossoms, even as they calculated the best angle to cleave an enemy in two. It's this duality that makes them so enduringly fascinating. They were warriors and poets, living paradoxes in armor. So, what does all this rigorous training tell us about the samurai? Well, for one thing, it wasn't all about swinging swords and looking cool in armor. It was about shaping a person who could thrive in a world where the stakes were as high as the mountains. A world where every day was a struggle, not just for survival, but for honor, legacy, and the future of their clan. Behind every romanticized image of a samurai was a life of relentless discipline, sacrifice, and a pursuit of excellence that was as much about the mind as it was about the body. The samurai weren't just characters from ancient tales. They were real people, navigating a complex society with rules as intricate as any game of chess. And if there's one takeaway from their grueling training, it's that the path to becoming a samurai was as unforgiving as the battlefield itself. But it was this very hardship that forged them into the legends we still talk about today. So next time you pick up a katana or watch a samurai flick, remember the grit beneath the glamour, the sweat behind the swagger. Because in the end, the samurai were as human as the rest of us, only with a bit more swordplay and a lot more discipline. So, with the samurai's discipline and grit etched into our minds, let's dive into the philosophical soup that flavored their existence. If you've ever wondered why the samurai didn't just throw up their hands and march off into the sunset when life got tough, the answer lies in 2 words: Zen Buddhism. This isn't just about monks meditating on mountaintops. It's about a mindset that could turn the chaos of battle into a form of art. Zen Buddhism swept into Japan from China around the 12th century, like a calming breeze through a bamboo grove, and the samurai lapped it up like a thirsty traveler at a mountain spring. Why? Well, Zen offered something pretty revolutionary. The idea that enlightenment could be achieved through direct, personal experience rather than endless scripture recitals. For a warrior class that lived on the knife edge of life and death, this was gold dust. Zen was all about discipline, mindfulness, and the ability to remain calm in the face of chaos. Everything a samurai needed to keep his head, while all around were losing theirs. Now, let's not pretend Zen was just a peaceful distraction from the daily grind of slicing through enemies. It was intensely practical. The practice of zazen, or seated meditation, trained the samurai to focus their minds, remain centered, and act without hesitation. Imagine trying to maintain perfect stillness while your legs scream in agony, and you'll get a sense of the mental fortitude this demanded. This wasn't a spa retreat. It was mental boot camp, sharpening the mind to be as lethal as the sword. Then there's Confucianism, which drifted over from China like an ancient philosophical import, adding its own flavor to the samurai ethos. Confucianism emphasized duty, hierarchy, and loyalty, concepts that fit the samurai lifestyle like a well-worn glove. It was all about knowing your place in the social order and fulfilling your obligations to family, lord, and society. For the samurai, this was the moral compass that guided their actions, both on the battlefield and in the tea room. Bushido, the fabled way of the warrior, was the love child of these philosophical influences. It wasn't a written code in the early days, more like a set of principles handed down through generations, evolving with each new era. Bushido emphasized virtues like courage, honor, and self-sacrifice, painting a picture of the ideal samurai as a paragon of virtue. Sounds noble, right? But let's not get carried away. The reality was that Bushido often clashed with the messy complexities of real life. Take, for instance, the concept of loyalty. Bushido demanded unwavering loyalty to one's lord, but what happened when that lord was a tyrant or a fool? Samurai were faced with the ethical dilemma of serving an unjust master or risking everything by standing up for their ideals. It's a bit like being stuck in a job you hate because it pays the bills, except a wrong move here could cost you your head, not just your benefits package. The infamous tale of the 47 Ronin is a prime example of Bushido's contradictions. When their lord was forced to commit seppuku, a ritual suicide, after an altercation with a corrupt court official, his loyal samurai found themselves masterless. According to Bushido, they were expected to avenge their lord's death, but doing so would mean becoming outlaws. Torn between duty and legality, they chose vengeance, ultimately achieving their goal but at the cost of their own lives. Today, they're celebrated as symbols of loyalty, but at the time they were outcasts, executed for breaking the law. It's a classic case of damned if you do, damned if you don't. Then there's the ideal of courage. Bushido glorified fearlessness in battle, but let's be real. Fear is as natural as breathing when arrows are raining down on you. The samurai weren't immune to fear. They just learned to control it. This wasn't about being a fearless hero. It was about facing the terror head-on and acting regardless. It's a philosophy that can be applied to anything life throws at you, whether it's a rival warlord or a particularly spicy sushi roll. The samurai's devotion to honor was another double-edged sword. Bushido demanded that a samurai who failed to uphold his honor should commit seppuku. This wasn't just a dramatic exit. It was a way to restore honor to oneself and one's family. But it also meant that honor was a fragile thing, easily shattered by a single misstep. In a society where social standing was everything, the pressure was immense. Think of it as living your life with a permanent spotlight on you, where one wrong move could lead to public disgrace or worse. And let's not forget the economic and social backdrop to all this philosophical waxing. Samurai weren't just meditating on mountaintops. They were managing lands, collecting taxes, and maintaining their status in a rigid social hierarchy. Zen and Bushido offered a way to navigate this world, providing the mental tools to balance the spiritual with the material. But this balance was precarious, and the contradictions of Bushido often mirrored the tensions in samurai life. Take the Tokugawa period, for example. By the 17th century, Japan had entered a time of relative peace, and many samurai found themselves with more time on their hands than battles to fight. Some became bureaucrats, others scholars or poets. Yet the ideals of Bushido remained, creating a cultural tension between the warrior ethos and the realities of peacetime. It was like having a Ferrari in a world of speed limits. Great to look at, but not much use for a daily commute. And here's a kicker for you. Despite the romantic image of the samurai as solitary warriors, they were often deeply involved in the arts. Tea ceremonies, poetry, and theater were all part of their world. This wasn't just about cultural enrichment. It was a way to cultivate the discipline and focus required by Bushido in times of peace. The samurai were expected to be both warriors and gentlemen, a duality that added another layer to their already complex identity. So, what do we take from all this? The samurai were living contradictions, embodying a philosophy that was as beautiful as it was brutal. Bushido was more than a code. It was a mirror reflecting the complexities of human nature. It demanded perfection in an imperfect world, leaving the samurai to navigate a path littered with moral dilemmas and existential questions. And maybe that's why their story still resonates today, offering us a glimpse into a life where the stakes were as high as the ideals they pursued. As we continue to unravel the samurai saga, keep in mind that these warriors were as human as they come. They grappled with fear, ambition, and the eternal quest for meaning in a world that was often as unforgiving as it was awe-inspiring. And while we might not be facing life-or-death duels today, the lessons of Bushido, a blend of courage, discipline, and honor, still echo in the challenges we face. So, the next time you're caught in a modern-day battle, whether it's a boardroom showdown or a personal crossroads, remember the samurai. Their philosophies may be ancient, but the wisdom they offer is timeless. Now, let's plunge into the chaotic vortex of the Sengoku period, a time when Japan wasn't just playing the Game of Thrones, it lived it. From 1467 to 1603, the country was a patchwork quilt of warring factions, each daimyo with ambitions as oversized as their armor. Forget the genteel samurai sipping tea and reciting haikus. This was the era of constant warfare, where allegiances were as changeable as the weather. Picture this. You're a samurai in the Sengoku period. You're not just sharpening your katana for the sake of tradition. Every edge could mean the difference between life and death in the next skirmish. The battlefield was your office, and the only thing on the line was everything. Samurai had to adapt or perish, and this survival of the fittest mentality led to some serious innovation in tactics and weaponry. Take the introduction of the arquebus, for example. Imported from Europe, this matchlock firearm made traditional armor about as useful as a paper umbrella in a typhoon. By the late 16th century, an estimated 300,000 arquebuses were in circulation in Japan, transforming the nature of warfare and forcing samurai to rethink their strategies. Now, don't get the wrong idea. Samurai didn't just drop their swords and start blasting away like extras in a Hollywood action movie. The sword remained a symbol of their status and a crucial part of their arsenal. But the inclusion of firearms meant battles were no longer simply about individual heroics. They became a deadly dance of strategy and coordination. The samurai had to adapt to this new reality, balancing the elegance of swordplay with the brute force of gunpowder. It was like trying to waltz while someone threw rocks at you. Not easy, but necessary. The Sengoku period wasn't just about weapons, though. It was a time of strategic brilliance, with leaders like Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu writing the playbook on how to win control over a fragmented country. Nobunaga, for instance, was a master of psychological warfare, employing tactics that would make Machiavelli proud. He once used a dummy army to trick a rival into overextending his forces, turning a potential defeat into a decisive victory. And Hideyoshi, the great unifier, was known for his ingenious use of alliances and diplomacy, sometimes winning battles before a single arrow was loosed. This was strategy at its finest, a real-life game of chess where the pieces were people, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. But let's not romanticize it too much. The Sengoku period was brutal, a time when betrayal was as common as the morning mist. Daimyo switched loyalties faster than you can say seppuku, and alliances were about as stable as a one-legged stool. It was a cutthroat world, and the samurai were right in the thick of it, navigating a landscape where yesterday's friend could be tomorrow's foe. The myths might paint these warriors as paragons of virtue, but the reality was a bit grittier, a constant hustle for survival in a world that was perpetually on fire. With the dawn of the 17th century, though, the flames of war began to flicker out. Enter the Edo period, a time of peace and prosperity that would last for over 250 years. The Tokugawa shogunate had managed to unify Japan, and the samurai found themselves in a strange new world where their martial skills were suddenly surplus to requirements. Imagine being a veteran firefighter in a city that just outlawed flames. What do you do with yourself? For many samurai, the answer was a reluctant pivot to bureaucracy. They traded their swords for scrolls, becoming administrators and officials in the new regime. It was a seismic shift, turning warriors into paper pushers, and it wasn't without its challenges. Sure, the samurai retained their status and stipends, but the transition was about as smooth as a gravel road. Many struggled to adapt, finding themselves caught between the ideals of Bushido and the mundane realities of governance. It was like asking a rock star to manage a library. Some took to it, others floundered. And speaking of stipends, let's talk economics. The peace of the Edo period was great news for Japan's stability, but it posed a financial conundrum for the samurai. They were still receiving stipends from their lords, a sort of feudal salary, but these payments were often in rice rather than cash. As the economy evolved and urban centers grew, rice alone didn't cut it. Samurai found themselves increasingly cash-strapped, their stipends losing value in an economy that was moving towards a more currency-based system. It was like getting paid in monopoly money while everyone else was using real cash. This financial squeeze led to social shifts, with some samurai engaging in side businesses, from teaching martial arts to, surprisingly, running pawnshops. Necessity, after all, is the mother of reinvention. However, such activities were often frowned upon, seen as beneath the dignity of a samurai. The struggle to maintain their status while adapting to new economic realities was a tightrope walk, and not everyone managed to stay balanced. Despite these challenges, the Edo period was a time of cultural flourishing, with samurai at the heart of an artistic renaissance. They became patrons of the arts, dabbling in poetry, calligraphy, and the tea ceremony. This wasn't just about culture for culture's sake. It was a way to assert their identity and status in a world where their traditional roles were evolving. It was also an expression of the duality of their existence, warriors who could pen a haiku as deftly as they could wield a blade. As the Edo period progressed, the samurai's identity continued to evolve. Romanticized image of the samurai as a solitary warrior was giving way to a more complex reality, a class of individuals grappling with the demands of a modernizing society, yet clinging to the traditions that defined them. They were both relics of the past and harbingers of change, embodying a paradox that was as fascinating as it was fraught. So, as we pause in our samurai saga, let's remember that the story of these warriors is not just about swords and glory. It's a tale of adaptation, resilience, and the enduring struggle to find one's place in a world that is constantly shifting beneath one's feet. The samurai were more than just fighters. They were survivors, navigating the tumultuous seas of history with a tenacity that still resonates today. And as we look forward to the next chapter, where the samurai's journey continues to unfold, let's keep in mind that their legacy is not just in their battles, but in their enduring quest for identity in a world that never stays the same. As we glide into the Meiji Restoration, we're stepping into a Japan that's shedding its feudal cocoon for the dazzling wings of modernity. The year is 1868, and the Tokugawa shogunate, which had kept a tight leash on the country for over 250 years, is about to get a rude awakening. Picture a teenager suddenly discovering rock and roll while their parents are still stuck on Beethoven. The Western world is knocking, and Japan is opening the door wide, ready to binge on technology, industry, and a little thing called capitalism. This is where the samurai, once the rock stars of Japanese society, start to feel the floor crumbling beneath their feet. With the emperor restored to power and the shogun out of the picture, the samurai class finds itself in a bit of a pickle. Those stipends and feudal privileges, they vanish faster than free sushi at a buffet. The Meiji government is keen on centralizing power and building a modern state, and that means dismantling the old feudal order, starting with the samurai. In 1871, the government abolishes the hand system, effectively dissolving the domains that had been the samurai's playgrounds for centuries. It's like telling a cowboy the Wild West is now a theme park. Things just aren't what they used to be. By 1876, the ban on wearing swords in public is the final nail in the coffin. The katana, once a symbol of samurai prestige, becomes a fashion faux pas, more suited to a museum than a stroll through Tokyo's bustling streets. Economically, the samurai are hit hard. Many find themselves jobless, struggling to adapt to a world where merit, not birthright, dictates one's place in society. The government offers a pittance in compensation, but it's like giving someone a paper umbrella in a monsoon. The shift to a cash economy leaves many samurai floundering, their stipends replaced with government bonds that depreciate faster than a samurai's patience at a tea ceremony. But here's the kicker. The samurai, ever the resilient brood, find ways to reinvent themselves. Some embrace the change, jumping into politics, industry, and education. Figures like Seigo Takamori, often regarded as the last true samurai, attempt to reconcile the old ways with the new, though not always successfully. Seigo himself leads a rebellion in 1877, the Satsuma Rebellion, against the Meiji government, a valiant, if doomed, attempt to preserve samurai honor. It's a dramatic last stand, ending with Seigo's death and cementing his place in history as a tragic hero. Yet, while the samurai as a class fades, their cultural legacy only grows stronger. The Bushido Code, with its emphasis on honor and discipline, finds new life in the military ethos of the newly modernized Japan. The samurai spirit is repackaged, becoming a cornerstone of national identity even as the physical samurai vanish from the streets. Globally, the samurai become the stuff of legend, thanks in no small part to the romanticized narratives spun by Western observers who can't get enough of the exotic allure. The image of the lone, stoic warrior, sword in hand and duty in heart, captures imaginations worldwide, from Hollywood blockbusters to martial arts schools in suburban strip malls. It's ironic, really, how the very class that struggled to find its footing in a changing Japan becomes a cultural icon, celebrated far beyond its original borders. And let's face it, the myths about the samurai are as sticky as rice on a sushi roll. The idea of the samurai as noble, honorable warriors persists, even if the reality was a bit grittier. Yes, they had moments of valor and integrity, but they were also human, navigating a world rife with political intrigue and economic necessity. The samurai were not just fighters, they were survivors, shaped by a society that demanded adaptability as much as loyalty. As we wrap up this whirlwind tour through samurai history, it's clear that their story is one of transformation. From feudal enforcers to cultural icons, the samurai have left an indelible mark on both Japan and the world. Their legacy is a testament to the power of myth and the enduring allure of the warrior spirit. So next time you see a samurai film or pick up a katana at a flea market, remember the real history behind the romance. The samurai may have laid down their swords, but their story continues to wield influence, shaping our understanding of honor, courage, and the complex dance between tradition and change.